Listen, if you don't want to ask hard questions, we're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
That's the beauty of this.
How do you represent a guy like Bill Cosby then? Do you ask your clients if they're guilty?
Yeah, I ask them to tell me the truth about what happened. How am I going to defend them if I don't know the truth? I've seen videos of clients that have committed crimes that I've had to defend. I'll never forget, anybody who knows Meek Mill, he's a tough guy and a guy of his word, quite frankly. And I saw him right after they took him into custody. Because of his celebrity status, they took him upstate and they put him into a wing with just the mentally ill patients for his protection. And when I first saw him, I didn't even recognize him when he came out of this cell. It was like a holding cell. It was like the bowels of a prison. And he looked at me and he said, the whole time he was in there, sometimes the lawyer is educated by the client, and he would say to me, Brian, when we get through this, and we're going to get through this, there's a lot of guys in here who need my help, a lot of them. When you operate at the level that those people operate, failure is not an option. Losing is not an option. Rape is, I think, the greatest evidence of man's inhumanity to man. But remember this, jurors were being asked to make a decision about whether he did it. And that case was, at least the way we tried it, the time we tried it, I thought a very defensible case on the facts. You want to kind of bring jurors to their best and make them realize that in a few short moments when the case is given to them, they're all that stands between him and a conviction for a crime he didn't commit, is the argument.
The jury of 12 people there, they know this is Bill Cosby in that room. They know Bill Cosby don't have a public defender defending him. Yeah. Like, you're a subtle guy, you're not like a flashy dresser, but they know that suit probably doesn't cost $2 and it's not from Joseph A. Bank.
That's right.
You get up there, though, and you look this jury in the eyes as Bill Cosby's attorney, and you said something to the effect of, "What's cooking, everybody?" I am joined in the bunker today, honored to be joined in the bunker today by Mr. Brian McMonagle. And that intro right there said a lot. Obviously, he repped Cosby in the first trial, not the second one. He got the mistrial and then quit. You'll hear about that today. And he represented Meek Mill, which I believe started around the same time, like 2017, something like that. And we know all about that case, obviously, because of what the city of Philadelphia did to him over many years. But I really, really appreciate Brian doing this. I appreciate his candor so much. He was so honest about the different moral questions you have doing a job like he does it. And look, I mean, he's one of the best to ever do it. But more importantly than that, I have known this guy at least a little bit throughout my entire life, and he's as good a person as there is. Humble as could be, just a great guy through and through, and I'm very glad that someone with his moral compass is doing the job that he does, because I know most of us couldn't. So thank you to Brian for coming in, and I hope you guys enjoy. 2 quick notes, by the way. In the second half of the episode, you will hear a 1-second skip that moves forward in the conversation. I was asking Brian about an ongoing case. I didn't realize it, and so I was asking him about stuff for like 2-3 minutes, and he was going, no, can't talk about this. So I just cut that part out. And early on in the podcast, first 5 to 10 minutes, you will hear me bleep out a name. Brian didn't catch the name I said. He asked me about it afterwards. It was another attorney. And when I told him who it was, he's like, I would have pushed back on that a little bit. I know that guy. So I bleeped that out. I'll ask him about that in a future episode, and we'll see where it goes. Anyway, if you have not gotten your 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover, what are you doing? The Pod Pro cover comes in queen or king sizes. It goes right on top of your current mattress, and it is wired directly into 8 Sleep's proprietary app that measures your sleep stages throughout the night and optimizes your sleep around you. You're going to wake up feeling better than ever before. So hit that link in my description and use the code TRENDIFIER at checkout. That's TRENDIFIER, and you will get $150 off your own 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover today, and you will go sleep in 6 hours and feel like you slept 8. That's how good this thing is. Check it out. Supports the show. You're going to love it. That said, you know what it is. I'm Julian Dorey. This is TRENDIFIER. And please welcome Brian McMonagle. Well, welcome to your second podcast ever.
Thanks for having me, Julian. I'm honored to be in the bunker.
Of course. Thank you for being here. You have actually been discussed on this podcast a few times before.
You took my name in vain a couple of times?
I was actually very, very nice, because I've always admired you from afar.
Yeah, that's a high compliment coming from you.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's true. But anyway, I really, really appreciate you doing this, because essentially I have been watching your career through the little teeny tidbits we get in the media, right? Like it's not much, because you are not an attention guy at all, which is actually very rare for what you do. But I often think about the level of objectivity that you have to be a guy like you and represent people. Like, obviously, you've done some crazy cases. Bill Cosby's one of them. Some big ones where the public opinion probably isn't on your side. And yet, you have a job to do. You got to go in there and represent your client. Is this something that, when you were a kid, you ever imagined yourself doing? Or did this just kind of become something where you got into the law and one thing led to another and you ended up on the defense side of the table?
Well, ironically, it started on the other side. I did envision myself being a career prosecutor. When I was in law school, I went to it was like a seminar, and it was the local public defender and the local prosecutor. And I remember listening to the local county district attorney saying, I don't represent people accused of crimes, I represent victims of crime. It struck a chord with me. And I really thought that was going to be the way that I would not only go but end. And I started as an assistant district attorney in the Philly DA's office, spent significant time in the rape and homicide units. And it was really only just a life choice economically that sent me to the dark side, if you will. So I left the DA's office in 1990 and pretty much ever since then have been practicing criminal defense.
Do you think that there is, I'm trying to think how I want to put this, but like an interesting conflict of interests built into the system where a great way to be able to get a reputation and then therefore economically do very well for yourself on the defense side is to start on the other side where you're trying to put a lot of the same people in prison? Now, when you came out, you had, was it your own firm you started?
I actually went to a big firm.
Okay.
Was doing some civil litigation for about a year and then left to work with a guy who had been set up as a criminal defense lawyer, a guy named Dan Alva, excellent lawyer. And I worked with him, and then I started my own firm shortly thereafter.
Gotcha. So you didn't take that exact path. You went to a different part of law. You went to non-criminal stuff.
Yeah,
out of the office.
I did. Great firm in Philadelphia, Cozen and O'Connor. Was doing a lot of traveling across the country. We had young kids, and it was a challenge, quite frankly. Yeah. And I missed the courtroom. With civil litigation, they're the brightest and the best, but they don't get into court as much as we do in the criminal end. And I was spoiled as an assistant district attorney. I was trying, a couple murder cases a month when I was in the unit, and I loved it and lived for it, and I missed it, and so I thought, well, I got to go back to the courtroom, and that was the easiest path to take. But, the conflict of interest, I remember when I first started doing it, I said, well, I'll be good at this. All I have to do is put a not in front of everything I say. And it's a little more complicated than that. There's a lot of restless nights. There's a lot of sleepless nights. If you have a conscience, you got to check it at the door. There is a greater good that we embrace, but let's not make any mistake about it. When you go in there to win. And it is a win-at-all-costs mentality if you're going to survive. And, quite often, you're not sitting next to the innocent man. There have been times that I have, and they're the greatest challenges, because if you think defending the guilty is hard, try defending the innocent.
Yeah.
So it's not a life I would recommend to all. You pay a price for it. Sometimes it's in friendships. Sometimes it's in social circles. Sometimes it's in the dark moments that you're alone. But, it is what I do, and I do take pride in the fact that I do it with lawyers in my firm that I admire, I respect. And I like to think we do it the right way if there is a right way.
That's a really, really transparent way of putting it. So there's a lot on the bone here, and there's a lot I would love to talk with you today about, but maybe a good way to really get into it, because you just hinted a lot about the mentality and how it changes from going from just sticking a knot in front of the word. I love that. That's great. But when you're in the prosecutor's office and you're trying cases, it is the same thing. You're playing to win, just like you said on the defense side. And so your job is to represent the people who have elected the administration to uphold the law. Obviously, that's what it's always supposed to be. But there is also a numbers game to it. So, as an example, the guy up in his whole thing was that he was like 88-0 or something like that. Yeah. And that's what sells, to be able to get him his next ticket in life and get him the big name and everything. And that's great. But you're telling me 88 times he tried a case and 88 times he was sure they were guilty? I could see 77 for sure. Yeah. Like, a lot of times people are guilty when they're bringing it. But like, I think we should be celebrating it if like a prosecutor is 86 and 7. And like the 7, he's like, you know what? Yeah, I don't think that guy did it. Or maybe once in a while that won't happen. But sometimes I'm sure you got to be thinking to yourself, oh, that guy didn't do it.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that because...
Can you just turn that mic a little bit? Like, keep it straight. Yeah, there you go.
Good?
Yep.
You like to think that, and I like to think that everybody I ever prosecuted was guilty. And I never had any questions about it. But you do find yourself, I got news for you, no matter what side of the table you're on, playing to win and winning at all cost. If you can't, or if you struggle with the idea that a person you're prosecuting might possibly be innocent, you got to stop. You know, you got to check yourself. And anybody who's 88-0 was walking in the winners, for the record. We used to have guys like that in the DA's office, quite frankly, that used to pad their stats. They'd take the winners and not try all the difficult cases. So I'd be real interested to see what cases he was trying at 88-0. But, you know, a lot of the cases that are brought, it's not a question of guilt or innocence. You know, God decides that. God only knows that in many cases. It's where's the evidence? What amount of evidence do you believe is the level to put somebody on trial for the rest of their life? And that's where the hard decisions are made. You know, you start second guessing yourself on whether somebody could possibly be innocent. You'll never prosecute anybody. Flip side, you start prosecuting everybody who walks in the door. You know, you may be 88-0, but there'll be some innocent men, women, children, et cetera, who are going to be convicted of crimes they never, committed. So it's no easy job. And, you know, a lot of people get on prosecutors. I don't run down that road. I was one. I married one. My best friend is one. It's a hell of a difficult job. You're representing victims of crime. You're the voice of the voiceless. But you better be a minister of justice. Because while guys like me on the other side can get away with our shenanigans, you represent the people. It's a higher calling than the one I have, quite frankly now. And I looked at it that way, and I think most prosecutors do. I haven't really run into too many, bad apples in the prosecutors that I've dealt with. Now, again, I'm only in one part of the country. I don't know how people, put their pants on across the country, but most of them are pretty good. Sometimes, though, ego can ruin a good prosecutor, I will tell you.
Yeah, that other thing you brought up about padding stats, too. That's like, I guess, the lesser example, because they are technically going after the cases that usually are home runs, like this guy did it. But still, they're not going after things that actually could use justice, that are harder for them to maybe win. But, like, you go in there, you argue the case, you believe in it, and you have great evidence to show that the other person did it. I mean, if you lose, the OJ trial happened.
Yeah.
That sometimes it happens.
That changed the world.
But you see what I'm saying? Like that one, the prosecutors, you could definitely, they didn't do a great job in that case in particularly. Yeah. But like sometimes you have 12 people on there. You don't know who they are. You don't know how they woke up that day. They may see something a different way. And we shouldn't, in my opinion, we shouldn't be punishing prosecutors when they do lose, unless it was something clear where it's like, well, they suck at their job.
I couldn't agree more. If you got a cause worth fighting, you fight it. That's your job, win, lose, or draw. I will tell you, as a prosecutor, you do suffer, though, the pain, and I suffered it. You live and die by those verdicts, because if you really believe, particularly when you're in a context that I was in as a homicide prosecutor, that somebody took a human life, the idea of losing to you is unimaginable. Not so much because it's personal, how I lost the case. It's because you're streeting somebody who did the unthinkable. So from that perspective, you've got different pressures, different thought processes than obviously we do on our side. On our side, we're worrying about, obviously, the innocent man.
Right.
Do I have that innocent person next to me? And if I don't do my best here, will I do my best when they do knock on my door? So the criminal justice system isn't perfect. And, we live in a society right now where people really demand perfection in everything, not just law.
So true.
And, so you're going to hear, well, he didn't do his job, she didn't do her job, whatever. That person did not do that person's job, whether it be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. You better stop expecting perfection because last I checked, none of us are.
It doesn't exist. I agree with you. And I think we do, I sit here in an armchair. I try to remember that sometimes.
You look comfortable.
Right? I am comfortable, but I'm in an armchair. I'm in the arena doing this, but I'm not in the arena of other things. So I'm sure I fail at it sometimes, but I try to be, like when I go to criticize, I got a lot of evidence on my side to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because to me, these things are so nuanced, and it's so refreshing to hear someone be so open about that. But I think about like the concept of time when it comes to what you do. And again, we're on the prosecutor side right now. We'll get to defense.
Yeah.
But like you're a prosecutor, you're trying a case. It's the worst one. It's a homicide.
Yeah.
Someone died.
Yeah.
Right? This is a person you're trying. You have a lot of evidence to prove they did it, and they have to pay for that. And they're not someone who is safe to walk among society. However, when you convict them, I mean, the word life, someone who's 25 years old or 20 years old, those are the worst. When I see someone who's like 18, 19, it was just a fuck up, and then, they did it, and they get sentenced to life. I get it, but it's also heavy as hell, man. Yeah. I mean, like you as a prosecutor, you got to be sitting in there like you obviously need to punish this guy, but you're going to go home that day.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, and I when I was a prosecutor, I was prosecuting murder cases very early. I was lucky. I moved quick. But I was 26, 27 years old. And I didn't blink. Never blinked. Life. Death penalty cases. I mean, imagine putting a needle in somebody's arm.
Did you win some of those, I assume?
Well, a lot of them never made it on appeal.
Right.
So nobody got executed, thank God, on my watch. But you get older. And you start having kids, and you start living life, really living life, Some people do it at an early age. I didn't. And now I think about what you just said, and I think about it a lot. And the idea of spending the rest of your moments on earth in a cell is a horrific thought. Yeah. The idea of having somebody die by lethal injection is a horrific thought. And so, so many times the people that are charged with the responsibility of doing those jobs may not be in the experienced part of their lives, or they take all the things you're talking about into consideration. I'm not so sure I did, if I'm telling you the truth. I was in there, wow. I had a job to do. This guy did it. I was looking at one thing, all the mess he left behind. The parents, the family members who had to wake up every morning with their life sentence, which not having a loved one next to them.
Yeah.
That's a life sentence too. And but you're right. As you sit, as you live a little bit, and then you switch sides. I switch sides. Now I'm defending guys, and I'm looking at guys that are supposed triggermen or killed somebody. And I'm having conversations with them, and they're being more decent than most people I know to me are. And you start to get a perspective. Somebody can make a mistake. Somebody could never have a chance. Somebody could never have had a shot. Somebody could have been raised by a wolf, And so it's a tough place to spend your days.
There is such a level of, in that kind of seat, being able to reflect and say exactly what needs to be said here, in the sense that a lot of these prosecutors that we are seeing are just like you were. They were 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, right? I'm in my late 20s. I get to talk to people all the time, like of all different backgrounds. So I probably have a little bit higher on the curve, like slightly than the average of like some understanding of things, but I can't change my age. I can't change where I've been and what I have yet to experience. I can't change the wisdom that comes with seeing things on earth, maybe the second time around or third time around. And so it is hard for me to imagine being in that seat, doing that at my age now, like, and having that heaviness on me. And it's also hard for me to understand why that's the system, that's the best system we've created. Because it's like we were saying earlier, it's all the incentivization. You come out of law school, you get a prosecutor's job, you have a good record, you uphold the law, boom, now you're on the other side. And now it's kind of like, you know, it's an internal game too. Everyone knows everyone. The prosecutors know you, you know them. You can make a deal, things like that behind the scenes. And that's where it gets dirty. And to me, it's like we're kind of setting up the system where when we rely on people who are so young and inexperienced in life, maybe they're great attorneys, like you were obviously a great attorney. You know, what is to say, like, you're a 26-year-old and you're sending a 20-year-old away for the rest of their life?
Yeah.
How much can you really know about that?
Yeah, it's an amazing perspective, and one that, you know, you're not thinking about when you're doing it. The whole system's set up kind of in that way, though. If you think about it, we pay people, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars who are preeminent athletes, and, you know, we'll pay a starting prosecutor what, $40,000. I mean, when I started it was $16,600. So that'll tell you how old I am. But you know, now what is it now? $50,000, $50,000.
Nothing.
And they're charged with the awesome responsibility of being a minister of justice. And it's probably not the best way the system could be designed, but no one's going to take the time to redesign it. And it's tough to redesign, quite frankly, because keeping people in law enforcement is a difficult thing when they've got other alternatives and other opportunities. And maybe we should really think, you know, across society, stop just talking about law for a second, but how we pay people, how we pay prosecutors, how we pay teachers, how we pay public defenders. I mean, you talk about doing God's work, public defenders, what they have to put up with day in, day out, you know, just taking whatever file comes across their desk and seeing the most difficult lives that our criminal justice system, you know, deals with. And you're onto something.
Yeah.
You're onto something. I mean, if you can figure out a way to make sure that only the wise are in positions of decision making in the criminal justice system, or at least have had a chance to gain wisdom. You get that a little bit. You know, you don't just go to the DA's office and get to the homicide unit. You got to try a bunch of trials. But trying a bunch of trials, you could try. Heck, and when I was in the DA's office, we could do 15, 20 in a year. It's not giving you life lessons. It's not giving you wisdom. I tell a story all the time, and I remember her. She was the first murder case I ever had. Her name was Cheryl Casper.
She was murdered?
No, I prosecuted her.
It.
And she found out her husband was cheating on her, and went over to the house where the husband was, knocked on the door. She had a gun in her hand. Girl answered the door. She said, "Where's my husband?" The victim said, "Well, you know, forget him." They get in an argument in the doorway. She shoots her, and the husband comes running out of the bedroom, out into the street, gun. She stands there, gets locked up, gets charged with murder. Never in trouble a day before in her life. I get the case. It's my first case. And
what's the charge?
Murder.
Murder one?
Murder one. And the lawyer that she had, I don't remember him much. He wasn't a real experienced fella. And I said to him, "Listen, you know, she's got no prior record. I'm going to give you way out here. Why don't we plead her to third-degree murder? You take your shot with the judge in terms of how much time she does." And this guy, you know, he kind of thought he was the cock of the walk or something. And he said, no, this is a involuntary manslaughter case. We're going to try this, the verdict. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, you know, I know I'm not the greatest thing since sliced bread, but how am I losing this case? And try the case, convict her. She gets convicted of first-degree murder, gets a life sentence.
No parole?
No, there is no parole in
I know
Pennsylvania.
It's different state to state.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, life without parole. She literally convulses right there in the courtroom. She'd had a kind of history of health conditions. And there she is in a convulsion. She's swallowing her tongue. I go down. She's bleeding, trying to keep her from swallowing her tongue. And she's bleeding all over me. I'll never forget it. And I go back to my office, to the homicide unit, and you know, I look like I'm like, man, I was shook. I mean, I was shook, and I said, "Listen, I just convicted this woman of first-degree murder. She almost died in the courtroom." And my boss said, well, mark the file. And so, again, what was that? That was a lawyer probably not thinking about maybe what he should have been thinking about, could have resolved the case in a way, and she's still in prison to this day. And
how old was she?
I want to say she was in her late 30s. Okay. It's a guess. It's been a long time. It was 87, 86. But I think about that a lot. I think about it on this side because I never want to make that mistake. I always want to give somebody an opportunity to save their life.
Hey guys, just a quick reminder, if you haven't already subscribed to the show, please subscribe, like the video, and as always, would love to hear from you down in the comment section below. To everyone who has been sharing the show around with your friends, thank you so much for doing that. It is the best possible thing we can do to grow this show and continue to get great guests like this. So thank you once again to all of you who've been sharing around the episode each week, and thank you to all of you who are going to do it now.
Through negotiations, through even sometimes when I think I can win, quite frankly.
Now here's another one, though.
Yeah.
I love that you use this example in particular, because you use one where you actually went to the guy with a deal. You looked at this and you said, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But you looked at this and you said, okay, there's a huge difference between what happened here versus somebody who plans how to do a murder for 7 straight days. Right? So on the level of danger and most likely to do it again, or like most likely to be a bad crime or whatever, it's all bad, obviously. But like the worst of the worst, you're looking at it differently. She, who's not an attorney, happens to hire someone who's a jerk-off, clearly. Yeah. And he says, no, we're going to win it. Yeah, okay. So you offer something that could get you a win because it gives you, and this is what I don't like, but I understand why you're doing it. Like, it can get you a win because you have the murder instead of involuntary, right? Like, that's more time, it's a bigger headline, all that. But you pull it down 2 notches. You go from 1 to 3. She then, on the advice of what turns out to be a bad attorney, goes to trial and gets convicted. This is like what they call the trial punishment or whatever, where if you decide to go, then you're fucked. I don't know how to fix it. I'm just taught, like, I think about this out loud, but I'm like, well, what do you do? Because you're trying to...
Well, a perfect system would be one in which, I shouldn't say a perfect system, but a better system would be one in which you didn't have mandatory sentencing. And some states do not, and we do. And, there would be a perfect example where a judge could do justice. He could bring the victim's family up and say, listen, I want to give you justice, but I want to give justice to the case. This is not somebody who premeditated this murder. This is somebody who acted in the heat of passion. Right. This is somebody who wasn't rational at the time. And this is somebody who's never been in trouble before, so I'm going to give her a chance at life. I'm going to give her a chance to get her life back after she spends some time trying to think about the life she took. Mandatory sentencing takes that away.
Right. And it's not, and it's obviously like we're not just talking about murder, we're talking about a whole bunch of things. There's people in prison right now for life who have weed charges. Now that's fewer and far between. But holy shit, man.
Yeah, don't get me started there.
And I understand that the law, and I'm saying this again, like as not a lawyer, and I know you guys, like there's a way you guys think about this that I can't. But like the law, you can't just get like picky and choosy with it, right? It's there because there's a set of standards, and every time you do something where it's picky and choosy, it's precedent. So now, what's the slippery slope with that? And I understand that. But also as time changes, things do change. And like also as time changes and I get older, I realize how much time is. Yeah. Someone gets sentenced to 5 years in jail. You're like, all right, buddy, you'll be out in no time. You go get Dunkin' Donuts afterwards. That fucking guy's in jail for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's a long, like we look at this and we're like, oh, he made a deal. He got 5. Oh, that's tough. That's a long fucking time. I couldn't even talk to myself 5 years ago, right? Like, I don't even know what I was thinking then.
Think about it, if you could spend 5 years in your bathroom.
Yeah. That's literally what it is.
Without chewing your arm off. Yeah. No, and if only everybody had your perspective, my friend, because they don't. And the system obviously is designed in a way where people keep their jobs because of the way the system is.
Yes.
And perpetuate this madness at times. There's a lot wrong about the system, and obviously politics so often get in the way of smart decision making because no one wants to, be in politics and run on a platform where they're going to be changing the outcomes of criminal cases and how long murderers stay in jail, and the next thing you know, they're looking at a commercial and they're no longer in public office anymore. So you run into that pitfall. How do you get the laws changed? Who's going to have the guts to change them? And then, you flip it. Then do you get so lenient that you have the wild, wild west, like sadly we're seeing in some of our major cities today?
Right.
So, and the pendulum in the criminal justice system, whether it be with mandatory minimums, crimes of violence, the Me Too movement, any of it, it always swings. And when it swings, it always swings to one end. It never swings in a rational way. And so the law obviously swings with it. And when it swings one way wide or another, injustice will occur.
I'm going to correct your statement. You're 100% right, except for this. It's not just the law. It's everything.
Yeah.
It's literally society can never be right here. I talk about it all the time. The law of reaction in physics, right? Every action gets a reaction. It's not called that, but you can tell I didn't do too well in physics. But every action gets an equal but opposite reaction.
Yeah.
So you can never live at that 50%. There are a lot of people in this country, even if you're just talking like with bullshit like politics, there are a lot of people in this country who, if they stayed away from just letting their emotional reactions then dictate what they need to think moving forward, they could step back and they could see, well, I think this, but I think that too. Oh, you know what? I think this, but I think that over there as well. Maybe I'm not. Maybe there's more nuance to this.
Yeah.
And so in the law, you are also a victim of those swings as you're explaining it. So like right now, the emphasis is more on what you were just talking about with the cities. Like we're seeing, there's people getting in fights with cops and shit, and they're out the next night. Like there's some crazy stuff going on. You have to disincentivize crime. I understand that completely. But how do I get that happy medium? How do I have a Department of Corrections where there's actually correcting going on? How do I have a department where you pay for crimes, but there's hope? When you get out, you're not done. You're not carrying a scarlet letter. You've paid your debt to society as the Constitution set it up to be, and now you can go be a citizen and you can try to move on with your life and be an upstanding person. Yeah,
well, not only is that good for the individual, but it's the greater good. I mean, think about it. How much recidivism is there? It's massive.
Yeah, it's insane. I forget the percentage.
And so if you're worried about recidivism, give, just like you say, people the opportunity to not only have a second chance, but to learn something. Most of the people that are punished by the system and in the system are in the system because they came into this world without great chances and great opportunities, like I had, like you had, and aren't raised. I always say it's kids who are never raised, who are having kids they will never raise, and the next thing you know, they're being raised out on State Road, in the criminal justice system. And to your point, can there be something done there in the penal system that can help? Guess what? Most difficult job in the world is working in a prison, quite frankly. And what are they? They're people who go in there every day. They are risking their lives quite often in very difficult circumstances. They're not built for that. They're not trained for that. They're not engineered for that. They're in there to do a job. They do the job. But what's happening? Somebody's in there. They spend their time in there. They come out with really nothing other than a lost part of their life. And then when they re-enter, what are they really doing when they re-enter? Are they going back to the same neighborhood? Are they going back to the same problems? Are they going back to the same, modus operandi that brought them into the first place? So it's bigger questions than you and I can answer, and bigger questions that'll get answered in our lifetime, I'm sure.
And that's the problem with this. I've never seen viable solutions. I see themes that can help, but you have to break something down completely from within, which could risk the entire system breaking in half if you do that, right? So you said somewhere in there 5-10 minutes ago where you talked about the politicians and the system and how it runs. And this is regardless of party. This is how it always is. You, when you were 26, 27, there as a prosecutor, yeah, your name was in the paper when cases happen, and that helped you and everything. But at the end of the day, you were a statistic. You were somebody that in November on an election year was running in an ad unknowingly that you didn't choose to be in, where some fucking candidate was saying, and I was tough on crime and our office successfully prosecuted, and we had X number of convictions and no losses, and vote for me on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And you are unfortunately now in a position where if you're the guy who's standing in court, you said this very early on when we were talking, maybe before camera, but if you're the guy who's standing in court and you realize as a prosecutor, this motherfucker is innocent, you are disincentivized from saying, Your Honor, I'd like to get rid of the case. I don't think this guy did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me say this though, and I think it's true. I've always been a big fan of what I call career prosecutors, meaning somebody who's making a career of it, and you want a group of individuals who have, and you see this in the United States Attorney's Office, in the Department of Justice quite often, folks that have been there for 20, 30 years, and a lot of them are some of the best trial lawyers you've ever seen. And they have not only talent, but wisdom and some discretion. You know, discretion is another big deal too, because you don't want to give too much discretion to an individual line trial lawyer or prosecutor.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, because, for instance, my case that I started with Cheryl Casper, I never walked out of the district attorney's office homicide unit and said, you know what, maybe today I'll just give somebody a break. I had a boss, an assistant chief and a chief, and they told me what offers I could or could not make within some limits. And so, you know, you can't give that discretion to 27-year-old Brian McMonagle, right? Because what the heck do I know? But
which isn't the worst thing either.
But wouldn't have been where I was concerned.
Yeah.
But you could give it to somebody who's 45 and 50, and sometimes I'll see that. I'll see, you know, fantastic trial lawyers in the Department of Justice, and they don't have the authority to negotiate. And I'm like, well, why not? You're the one that should be doing it, you know.
Right.
But you know, when you're single-minded in anything in life, and not, as you said a little while ago, looking at both sides of the equation long enough, or you have a thought that's an original thought maybe once a week if you're lucky. You know, if that could happen, then I think we'd all be a lot better off on both sides. I think our streets would be safer. I think our innocent people would be safer from injustice. I think the people that make a mistake and deserve a second chance, and there's lots and lots and lots of them that nobody ever wants to talk about, would benefit from it. It just seems like there could be a better way. You know, right now in Philadelphia, you know, it's always so difficult to keep prosecutors, you know, and to keep them for long periods of time.
How long did you do it again?
I was only there for a little over 5 years.
Keep that mic close.
I was only there for a little over 5 years, and so pretty quick, maybe 6, something like that. But you know, you don't have that, and when you don't have that, boy, it's a hot mess. Yeah. You're not going to get expertise in the courtroom where you need it. You're not going to get the kind of people that have the kind of thought process that's necessary to really do justice. We're lucky that many of the lawyers that I go up against in Philadelphia are really smart, really talented, and pretty mature for their age. But you can't buy wisdom. You know, it's got to come, and it doesn't come early. It didn't come from me early. It's still coming. You know, I'm still a work in progress, and I've been doing this for over 30 years.
I'm sure there's something out there that I haven't seen. There's got to be. The internet's a big place, but I don't know how many high-powered defense attorneys who came from that side would or have spoken the way you're speaking about this. I just really appreciate it, because it's something I care a lot about, and you are admitting that, like, yeah, I was young and, like, you know, we got a lot right, but there's stuff that gives me sleepless nights about that.
Yeah.
You know, so you talk about the one case that's a wild story, but was there a case, a serious one, doesn't have to be a murder, but something serious where someone went away for a long time, where while the trial was going on, or even right after, you thought to yourself, this person didn't do it?
Yeah, no. And I don't know that I could have survived that. I was lucky. I mean, listen, and back then, you know, I worked under Ed Rendell and Ron Castillo later. We had a pretty good vetting process. You know, you weren't putting people on trial for murder where you weren't pretty sure as sure can be that you had the right guy. And I don't ever have that memory. I do have a memory when I was in the rape unit of a couple of close cases, and they ended up being split verdicts where, there was always questions, and the juries always seemed to get it right. The worst thing in the world would be the idea of prosecuting somebody who was innocent.
Yes.
And back then we did death penalties. And think about it, you get that one wrong and there's no tomorrow, once the appeals are over, it's game, set, match. So I was lucky. I think, I haven't heard of any cases that I had that somebody found out that somebody was innocent. And if I did, not sure I'd recover from it.
Think about this though. That was 85, 86, 87,
Yeah.
88. You're 35 years older now.
Yeah.
There are people that you put in.
Still there. Oh, yeah.
Never getting out.
Oh, yeah. Cheryl.
Think about how much
Yeah.
could have changed in that time.
Yeah. No, I actually...
Not saying it did.
Yeah,
but
no,
I'm
I
saying.
do. And it's funny, I'm working on a case now involving, person will be nameless, but for a pardon. And, in Pennsylvania, we have the governors able to, do the commutations.
Oh, so it's a state issue.
Yeah,
Got it.
and
Okay.
person had a pretty significant record, and since the release has gone on to be one of the, quite frankly, great artists anywhere, and anywhere, and I'm not talking about music. I'm not talking about music.
Oh, okay.
And
That's where I was going.
no, and you look at it from the perspective. I see what this person has done with their life since and is doing with their life now, and the magnificence of it. And it is the exception and not the rule. And you see so many nice stories that are really you want to tell them over and over and over again, because it's what can happen when the system works. And unfortunately, there's too many countless other stories that are on the other side of it. But we need to do something to allow people to change the way the book ends. Yes. For them, and to give them the chance to change the way the book ends. And yet, it's complicated. It just is. And every time somebody walks into a school with an AR-15 and slaughters innocent children, or drives a plane into the World Trade Center, it removes the possibility of kind of that kind of discretion, because we will always look to those cases and say, well, you know what? The system has to be in a place because of that. Yeah. Otherwise, what else are we going to do? And so I'll sit there and I'll go, well, that just changed things forever. That'll just change things forever. And listen, if any of this was easy, somebody a heck of a lot smarter than me would have thought of a way to fix it, and it's not easy. The prisons exist in this country for a reason. They always have, all over the world. And you would have thought, though, by now we would have gotten a lot smarter in the way that we deal with folks that go into prison, because selfishly we should. Selfishly.
What do you mean selfishly?
I want to be able to walk down the street of Philadelphia not worried about,
Right.
somebody who'd been in prison for 3 years coming up to me and putting a gun in my head. Selfishly, you want people rehabilitated. Forget what's good for them. Selfishly, for your kids, for their safety, for the good of the order, for the good of the many. And so I don't think people look at it that way. They're always thinking, well, he doesn't deserve it. She doesn't deserve it. They don't deserve it. Forget them for a minute. What about you? What about your neighbor? Don't you want somebody to get the chance to come out, to do it right, get a job, become productive? We can't figure that out. Some people obviously never figure it out who go to prison. But every now and then, again, I'm working on this case now, and I'm going to kill myself getting this guy a commutation, because he's earned it. And I think you need to earn things in life, and people should have to earn them. But if they earn them, there ought to be a reward. So we'll see.
And that's another thing too, like how we look at crime in society versus like what type of crime it is. To use your story, what was her name again?
Cheryl Casper. Yeah.
So Cheryl Casper, that was a crime of passion in the moment, wasn't premeditated. She did kill somebody.
Yeah.
Now, they took some very poor actions to put her in that situation, but she still did it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
sure.
It's a bad
she
crime.
She took a life, yeah.
However, you know what's worse than that? Like in our book, and in my book too, somebody raped somebody.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't kill him, but they killed a part of him. And it's like, you know, you have daughters. You can imagine what you'd want to do in that type of situation.
I used to actually say, I've said it time and time again, I used to say it when I was in the rape unit, DA's office. Rape is, I think, the greatest evidence of man's inhumanity to man. Plain and simple. It's worse. It can be worse in many instances than murder because, sadly, the murder victim is gone. The rape victim, you know, can lead a life sentence. So you're not wrong.
So how do you represent a guy like Bill Cosby then, knowing that?
Well, you know, forget Bill Cosby. How do I represent anybody charged with rape or anybody charged with murder? I have to believe that the system needs to work. And so the only thing worse than a rapist is the person who's falsely accused of rape. So who defends that person? Who's there for that person? So, you know, make it Bill Cosby, make it anybody you want. If I don't do what I do, then you could be that guy. You could be that college student who I recently represented who law enforcement searched his dorm because there was an accusation of rape at a party. And horrible story. They're getting ready to charge this kid with rape. Excellent student, good kid. Accusation was that he took somebody out onto a balcony and raped them. Okay. And law enforcement reaches out to me and says, you want to bring him in for an interview? We're going to charge this kid. And I said, well, hell no. I said, you know, I don't let my clients be interviewed, you know. Hell no. Maybe you didn't Google me, you know. Arrogant, stupid way to think, right? And detective says, well, I really think you ought to bring him in because we got something for you. And lo and behold, the balcony was overlooking a parking lot in this complex where the alleged rape took place. And, you know, they're breaking into cars, so they stuck the video camera up, and it took the entire incident into play. And we had a video of it. And exactly what my client said happened, which was a consensual sexual encounter. I won't get into the nitty details, but you know what I'm saying.
Video saved him.
And I swear to you, and I know this to be a fact, and the detective told it to me, who was a great guy. He said, you know, but for this video, he's going to prison. An accusation from a young person that he did it, who was probably too drunk to remember what the heck he or she did. And how is it that I can do what I do? Let me tell you what, for anybody who's ever been accused of a crime, you know, somebody like me ought to be there, just in case somebody gets it wrong.
The way that you put it with fighting for the guy who's innocent and being more concerned about that, I do agree with that. I am more bothered now. The other side.
I know
is
you
that
want to talk about Cosby, so I'm happy to talk about it.
We'll get there. We'll get there for sure. We'll talk about that. But like, I also, you know, I want to go where you go too. I don't force things in here.
No, I know you don't.
But like, the idea that someone did something bad and got away with it is awful. When you let that happen on a mass scale, you get some of these problems in cities that we have.
Yes, you do.
So no one wants that. I don't want that.
Neither
and
do
this
I.
is me where someone can call me out and use my words against me and say, well, you want it both ways, Julian, and that's not possible. Yeah. However, I would lose more sleep. I'd lose sleep over both, but if I were in your position and I had two cases. One guy, the guy got found not guilty and he did it, and I know he did it. And then the other case, the guy got found guilty and he's innocent, and I know he's innocent. I'd lose sleep over both, trust me. But I'd lose more sleep over the fact that a man is sitting in a 6x8 cell for the rest of his life for something he didn't do. That is my personal, like in my life, that is my phobia. The idea that I could ever be in a cell for something I didn't do, and I could, you know how you feel when the truth's on your side. You could be screaming it to the world, like, guys, I didn't do this. and no one believes you, and they say, you fucking did it.
Yeah.
And they put me in there. Like, that would be heavier to me. So I admire the fact that seems to be like, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, but like, you're thinking of it as, all right, I do 5 cases, I get a few not guilties, but if one of them actually was not guilty, then it was worth it.
Well, and the reality of it is probably not even that. I mean, it may be 100 to 1. I don't know what the numbers are in my career of how many people I've defended and whether or not, somebody might or might not have been innocent. It's the idea that there have to be adversarial roles for the system to work because you need to be there to protect the innocent. You need to be there to protect people who are charged with crimes, whether they did it or not, so that the system can work. Otherwise, it's a train wreck. What are you going to do? You're going to have a prosecutor in there? It's like a grand jury. You can have a prosecutor in there that could indict anybody for anything. Test the facts. Who's going to test them? Who's going to challenge them? Who's going to put it up to the light? If the system works perfectly, then guilty should never go free, right? You got a prosecutor there. I got news for you. When I was a prosecutor, you'd have to be one hell of a lucky guilty guy to have gone free while I was a prosecutor. So the system should work. Just because I'm there doesn't mean some guy's going home who did it. I mean, no matter what my website says, we lose cases. So, think about it. For the system to work, there has to be an adversarial system. I get it. I've got friends, I've got loved ones who are like, how can you do what you do?
Yeah.
How do you sleep at night? Guess what? It ain't easy. But make no mistake about it. I can't tell you how many people, particularly, in my everyday life, who thought that way, whose kids I've defended, who give me the call. Oh my God, I'm under suspicion for something. If I was a catty kind of guy, I'd say, well,
you didn't.
How
like
come
this?
I didn't get invited to your party? But listen, there are certainly more noble ways to make a living than the way I make mine, I suspect. But not when it comes to defending an innocent person. There may not be.
No, I think the way you do it, as I said at the outset, I think, or maybe before camera, but you do it in the classiest way possible. You are someone who legitimately avoids the cameras. They only get you when you're walking out of the courtroom and like there's 20 in your face.
Well, you know what? That wasn't always true. I got to tell you, Julian, it's nice of you to say that. And I there was a guy I tried a case with 100 years ago. It was a big mob case.
This was the Martinez case?
Yeah. So you know everything. So, I had just started doing criminal defense work, and I was trying to make a name for myself. And just about every day, somebody from, I think it was Fox News or somebody, would have had a camera outside the courthouse. So I'd be the first one down there. And they'd be sticking a mic in my face. And in federal court, there's rules against that. You're not supposed to be commenting on criminal cases while they're being tried. Which
There's a lot of guys breaking that rule.
Well, and I was, let me tell you. Daily, and the prosecutor in the case, they're strike force guys, they're really good guys, and they called a sidebar and they said, Judge, listen, we really have all the respect in the world for Mr. McMonagle, but he's having a press conference every day downstairs. And the judge, who was a great guy, and he said, Brian, is that true? I went, yeah, Judge, I said, basically every day. He laughed. He goes, well, you're not supposed to be doing that. Is that going to end now? I went, yeah, it's going to end now. So I got back to counsel table, and one of the lawyers in the case, boy, I tell you, talk about wisdom, a guy named Harvey Weisbart. And Harvey would go on to become a judge later, but he'd been traveling, he'd been trying cases forever. And he said, Brian, I'll never forget. He said, Brian, he says, just to let you know about publicity and stuff, he says, 100 years from now, nobody's going to know you were ever alive whose last name isn't McMonagle. It was like a silver bullet. Like, just do your job, And what I've since learned since then is more often than not, I do my client a disservice by being out there. You think you're accomplishing something in the whirlwind, and Cosby is a perfect example where you're going to get out in front of the story and you're going to tell the narrative the way your clients tell it. And you walk out there and you say something stupid, and I've said some horrifically stupid things over the years. And I can tell you that I've learned kind of the hard way. I do pick my spots. I do think there's a time for it, perhaps. If I feel like someone's been victimized, and the Meek Mill case was a classic example of that, where we really had to drive a narrative so we get some support across the state. But for the most part, I think you do yourself a disservice, and more importantly, it's ego. And when you're driven by ego, I've learned you're going to fail. Maybe not right away, but it's going to catch up with you. And yet, I appreciate you saying that I'm doing a lot better job of it now.
Yeah, because that was you're not saying this. Young. That was like 25, 28 years ago, and I guess that's why, because there's no videos available. Like you're not really. There are not a lot of videos of you online. There's not a lot of news reports. Like whenever I used to see it, even growing up, and I'd see like, you walking out of the court on 6 ABC or something, they never got a word from you.
Well, there's a couple things too. One is the best work I've ever done have been in cases that no one's ever heard about. For clients who really didn't want the story of their exoneration or the story of their acquittal or the story of their wrongful prosecution or really the story of their mistake being told in the media. They got to go back to their lives, their homes. So what are you doing? You're up there for you. You're not up there for them. They don't want you out there. And so, in high-profile cases, you may have to do it. You can't run from it. But I think most of the time you're really doing it for you, and that's just pure ego and quite frankly, counterproductive. But I'm sure I'll make that mistake again a time or two before somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, you're through.
Well, I mean, what do you – because I don't know if you want to say this out loud, but your rate's pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been around the block. So I'm always looking at some of these cases where it can be obvious, like a Cosby one. That guy, he's not missing any meals, so it's no problem paying you. But like then I'll see you take other cases where I'm like, well, that dude is probably not wealthy. So are you doing some of this stuff pro bono? Or
well, sometimes we get involved in cases because people have asked us to that mean something to us. And I guess maybe that's just the easiest way to put it. There'll be colleagues, sometimes former law enforcement officers, sometimes former lawyers, family members, friends, where, we'll bite the bullet, if that's what you want to call it.
Sure.
And get involved in cases that have some meaning that are not going to be a financial reward for us. I used to do a lot more of that than I do anymore, only because of energy and also because I figured something out. I should have figured out a long time ago that, you really want to be taking less cases because you do better work than going back to back to back to back to back. And you're going to drop balls. You're going to make mistakes. And but we try to be fair. I mean, quite frankly, there's a lot of other lawyers probably charge a little bit more than me. But no, our rate is high and probably not high enough for some of the guys I work with. They think I should be charging more. So
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, but and you know what? It all works out in the end. I think in doing cases sometimes that there is no financial reward for. I'm a big believer in karma, like crazy. My wife would tell you. I mean, big believer in karma. So what goes around comes around. You do a solid somewhere. I figure it may not come back to me, but maybe it'll come back to one of my kids in some wind of life.
Wow.
So why not just do things that way? Now, again, there's always a selfishness involved in this profession. We're in it to make money. Hell, if I wasn't in it to make money, I'd still be in the DA's office.
Right. No, and that's the reality in life. People are going to act. They're going to act in the interest of ambition and the interest of them and their family and things like that. And I'm not going to villainize that at all. I don't want to be sitting here worth $8,500. Yeah. 2 years from now.
Something tells me you're not going to be.
Well, we're working on it, but I couldn't afford you right now. Put it that way. You'd rip through me in about an hour. But anyway, like I do often joke that you're always representing guilty guys, and it's hilarious to me. But you did just have one where. I mean, this one was bad. The Amtrak conductor. Yeah. I mean, this guy was so clear to me, looking at it through the media and what happened, that he made a human error in 2015, and you can explain the full case in a second.
Sure.
But this was the state simply trying to get a W and simply trying to say, oh, society needs a fall guy, So we need the fall guy. This is the fall guy, and we're going to try him in court. And they dragged it out for 7 years of his life. And I would imagine this guy's not a wealthy dude who probably couldn't afford your rate for all the work he had to do for him. But you went in there, and I think the jury deliberated for like an hour or something.
Yeah.
It was quick.
It was quick. You talk about one of the worst experiences and best experiences in one case. This was a young man who was, by everybody's description, one of the top engineers they had at Amtrak. And
The train, by the way, for people listening.
Yeah, the Amtrak train here in Philadelphia that ran out of 30th Street and heading to New York. And
Can you just talk in that mic a little bit? Sorry.
That particular night they left 30th Street, and whoever they were, criminals on the tracks, were stoning passenger trains that were coming up and down the Northeast Corridor, and they had struck a SEPTA train and disabled it. And when Brandon Bostian was my client, he was coming out of 30th Street. He was getting all this chatter that the SEPTA train had been hit by projectiles, which didn't turn out to be the case. It was actually a stoning, and that the SEPTA engineer was disabled. He actually was struck by glass in his eyes. So all this chatter, he passes the SEPTA train, and then by everybody's account, including the National Transportation Safety Board that investigated it for 2 years, he lost situational awareness. There was a curve that he thought he had already hit that he hadn't hit yet, and at that curve you had to come down from 110, which is where they can get to 50, and just missed the curve at night. And the district attorney's office investigated the case, found there to be no criminal liability, that it was obviously a mistake. And
this is 2015?
2015. And then inexplicably, the lawyers that represented the victims of the crash brought a criminal complaint in the Philadelphia courts. And the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office said, we've already looked at this. We're not taking it. They shipped it to the Attorney General's office, and over a weekend they charged him with 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter and hundreds of counts of recklessly endangering another person. Case got dismissed once. Case got dismissed twice by judges. An appeal was taken and went to the Superior Court. And then 7 years later, however long it was, he actually is forced to go on trial for charges that could have sent him away for hundreds of years. And he was acquitted in an hour. And it was that. It was, when something horrible, and it was a horrible accident. It was just terrible, the lives that were lost and people that were injured. But when something like that happens, everybody wants to curse the heavens, and they want to look for somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And one of the things we spoke to some of the jurors that resonated with them was, I said, think about it from the context of life and the difficult decisions that people make, and I use the example of the operating room. Great doctors, good doctors under the gun, making a decision, making a mistake, malpractice. It's a mistake.
Yeah.
Are we going to start locking them up? And that, I think, really resonated with the jury, that good people can make mistakes and don't have criminal culpability or liability. But you talk about, why do I do what I do? I've never felt better about being a lawyer in my life than being able to have a beer with him and his family after that. And his family are these remarkable people from way out in the Midwest. And they spent their life savings defending him on that case. People who'd worked their whole lives. So there's good in this. It's not just me, every now and then representing, somebody that, deserves to be buried under the prison.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stories, and that's probably the best one recently that I've had, and one that I'll cherish always.
And that's why you do what you do, right there. You can't
there
say
it is.
You can't say it better than that. It is. It's such a, and it's also, and this is the lesser situation because this is someone's life in the balance, and there's other people who died, and that's over, their loved ones can't get them back. But you also have a money thing in the balance there too, not just for the payments that have to go to you to defend this fucking guy for 7 years, but what about all the taxpayer money that goes towards that?
Yeah.
I mean, how many? That must have been 2 or 3 different DA's offices at the end of the day that ended up filing through where they turned it down, then eventually this one has to try it.
Yeah.
Like that's, as somebody who's paying taxes into the state, I'm not in Pennsylvania, but if I were, like, that's where my money's going?
Yeah.
This guy who's not going to hurt a fly made a mistake?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we see a lot of that. I'm seeing it now with a lot of law enforcement officers that I'm defending in Philadelphia because, ever since that horrible murder in Minnesota, the spotlight's changed and the pendulum has swung. And now I just see these cases that are being brought, and I think to myself, like, Rome is burning. What are we doing?
Yeah.
We're taking our eye off the ball.
Yeah.
Again, it's that swinging of the pendulum. It's like you say, people not taking a step back and looking. It's the forest from the trees. No one wants to kind of take the view from above and look down and say, wait a second, this is what I should be focusing on. And so that's a classic example of it, a rare example of it. I mean, there's not many of them, but when they happen, it really crystallizes the problem.
Yeah, and that's like the whole police thing. I don't know that I've ever seen more attention go to one occupation across the board than especially after the George Floyd one. Yeah. Like, it got down to every little thing they do. And don't get me wrong, like, whatever the percentage is, if it's 10% of cops or really shouldn't be cops and they're not good, there are still many of them that are good. And, like, I hold them to a higher standard because they're law enforcement, right? Like,
Sure.
they're
Sure.
there to protect us and serve. But at the same time, when you can't empower them to do anything, I feel for some of these guys who now get blamed when they don't pull their gun out because they're afraid to do something wrong. And I'm not talking about the Uvalde shooting in that one. That's totally different. That was fucked up. But you see some of these other situations where cops get called and they're like, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I'm not going to jail. They determine, like, the level that it's at. It's like, okay, well, this one isn't a murder. I'm not going to jail over this. So figure it out for yourself.
Now. It's worse than ever now because of exactly what you say. And I say to people all the time, because, people go, boy, you guys defend the police. You're defending the police officers. I'm like, wait a second. Last I checked, are they not citizens of this country?
Yes.
First of all, are they not entitled to a defense? And more importantly, did you ever risk your life for a stranger? I mean, did you? I ask rhetorically, not you. But I mean, like, I love these people that just want to, that all the police are bad. Really? So when you woke up this morning, did you go out and realize that you probably might not be coming home tonight because you got to go into some demilitarized zone and police? 3 o'clock in the morning when there's a crime, I don't go out there and check it out. I don't go out there and break into a house and have to go in and worry about automatic weapons or AR-15s being on the other side of the door. So take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Bad cops are bad cops, and when they're bad cops, they'll get prosecuted. But to prevent police officers from doing their jobs, to disparage what they do, and to make it almost impossible for them to do what they do, boy, you talk about the greater good. I mean, just use your head. Be selfish a little bit. Do what's good for society. And the other thing is this, you brought up, what happened down south recently, Texas, horrible. Go back to it. These aren't Navy SEALs, right?
No.
These are people that we pay them no money. We get people that aren't trained.
Yes, that's true.
And then we're shocked. I mean, listen, I say to myself, and I said it at home, I'd have went in there with a water pistol, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to think, but again, I never had to leave my house and defend anybody. And there's the classic example where you look at the most horrific situation where police officers did not do what we expect of them, which is to risk their life. But say it all. Like when you're saying that that was a mistake, and it was, when you're saying that, my God, could they have saved a kid or two? They sure as hell could have.
Yes.
I believe that. But say it all. Say that's what they do every day. So when they do what they do every day, you put it in perspective, because I don't. The guy down the street doesn't. The politician doesn't. The defense lawyer doesn't. So I just want, it's like every other thing in life, I always try to step back and say, all right, well, I get it, but you try it.
Yeah, and it's also That's with anything. And I try to be careful.
With anything. I don't mean you, because I know how you feel about it. I mean, listen, if you don't want to ask hard questions, we're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
That's the beauty of this, what you're doing. You're putting ideas into the marketplace for people to discuss, because somebody better start discussing them. And I love that. And that's what this country's kind of built around, if you really think about it. But I find so many people, unlike you, who are one-dimensional.
Yes. Yeah.
All wrong here, all right there, all wrong here.
Yeah.
And some of them are friends of mine. And hell, maybe I've done it a time or two. But, it's one of the things I've tried to pass on to my kids. Like, sit back and look. There's not always just one right answer. And sometimes there aren't any.
No. And there can be cases that are, there are cases that are, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but they're totally, they're an outlier. There's something that's different, right? Now, like the George Floyd thing, unfortunately, that was getting to a point where that was not an outlier. Whereas, maybe you just ran into a bad police department in Uvalde in this case.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of them would have gone in, and the thing I do try to be careful with, and I fail sometimes, so it is what it is, but the whole thing of, if I were blank, then I would blank. You don't know, as you said.
Right.
You don't know for sure. Now, are there a few that I've thought about, like literally, like sitting in my car thinking about for like 8-9 years of my life on and off? Yes. Do I feel really good about, I don't need to get in what those are, but do I feel really good about those? Yeah. But could I be 1,000%? No, there's still 99 point something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you don't know how you're going to lock up. I listened to one the other day. I forget who it was, but it was a Navy SEAL in an interview talking about a fellow Navy SEAL, a guy who had made it through BUD/S out in Coronado, who was on one on SEAL Team 2, 3, 6, something like that. And they're on a mission, and the guy locked up. And they're all like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he turns to them, he goes, "I got a wife and kids.
Yeah.
I can't do this." Now, it's fucked up that it got there, but like, that's the best of the best. And there was still someone in there who made it through everything, and like, when push came to shove in a tough situation, couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So like, you said this was something else, but you are never going to get perfection. And not. I do agree.
Yeah, you're never going to get it. And, listen, you keep striving for it, and you keep hoping for it, and good things, tend to happen. But we just, and again, we're spending all our time with that particular incident talking about that. It's on the news every night.
Yes. Why
aren't we talking about how some idiot gets a hold of an AR-15 rifle? So, I mean, we always seem to end with the news piece that's going to drive, I don't know, the narrative a little bit and move the needle a little bit. And we sometimes forget, the reason that the police officers had to get there that day and who it was that assassinated all those innocent children and teachers that day. So I don't know why we're not talking about that more. I guess a lot of people are, and we ought to be talking about it more because, again, selfish, be selfish. Be selfish. I hear all these people, well, I want the right to, I have friends that are hunters. I believe in the right to bear arms. What do you need an AR-15 for? So a police officer can blink? So you can kill more people? I mean, so again, why isn't anybody just being, let me think about this a little bit more. Let me really think about it. Could I sacrifice a little bit of my own, just a little bit of my own freedom so that maybe that doesn't happen again? Can I, we drive 55 miles an hour. I got a nice car. I can hit 100 anytime I want. I want to hit 100. I'm not allowed. I hit 100, I got to pay a price. So let's just kind of, step back. We'll spend all day talking about whether, the police officers blink. Well, how about not putting them in that position and giving them a fighter's chance? And not letting somebody get access to an AR-15. I'm done with that, by the way. I won't talk about that anymore.
You done with what?
the assault rifle thing. It's one of my my pet peeves.
Well, let's lean right into it actually, because you're getting at something, and this is one of those impossible lines, and I struggle with it all the time. But you are getting at a prime slippery slope. So I want to give you an example
Yeah.
that would probably explain this the best, because I won't do a good job if I try to put this in words.
Sure enough.
But Jim DiOrio, who you know, he was on a podcast with me 6-7 months ago, and I actually never knew this, but it turns out he was one of the FBI agents involved with the San Bernardino shooter in, I think it was 2015, which was a whole thing. For people that don't remember, there was a terrorist who was allegedly ISIS-inspired who killed a bunch of people in San Bernardino, California, and the FBI recovered his cell phone. Now, to get into his cell phone, they needed the codes, and no one had the codes. And Tim Cook at Apple said to them, he goes, I want to give them to you. I hate what this guy did. I think it was like in his backyard too. Like, I want to catch this guy. I want to catch anyone who's associated with him. But if I give you that code, I am setting a precedent where I give up the privacy of someone, in this case, a horrible person, the worst of the worst. But I give that up, and now you're going to come at me with something less after this. And you're going to say, well, you gave us up the last one. Give up. This guy's almost as bad. Give up that one too. And eventually I'm going to be giving up everything on my users. Now, this might have been some public posturing to make Apple look holier than thou, because, as I like to say, they're a dwarf among midgets when it comes to like privacy, right? All these companies don't give a fuck about your privacy.
Of course they don't.
But Apple's at least like, well, look at us. We did it once. You know what I mean? So like we can reach the cereal box that you can't.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I know what I know publicly, and this was the stance he took on that. And it was tough because, like, of course, I want to make sure there's no other terrorists in there. But Jim DiOrio's sitting here saying, I wanted him to give me that fucking iPhone. Andy Bustamante, the CIA agent who was in here, who I told you about, he wasn't involved with that case. That fucking guy won't buy Apple products, though, because of that.
Yeah.
And I understand it, because these guys are patriots. And the way I put it to Jim is I said, Jim, if I give you that power, Jim DiOrio, and I'll replace it now, Brian McMonagle, if I give you that power, do I feel really comfortable that you're going to do the right thing moving forward? Even if there's a couple human elements that, like, you slip on something here and there, do I feel like you're going to uphold the Constitution and not use that power for bad? Yeah, I feel real. In fact, I don't have any hesitation on that. And do I also think that probably statistically, 9 out of 10 people who I put in that room with you who work for Agency X are probably good people who want to do the right thing? Yeah, I do think that. You know what the problem is, though? The 10th. The 10th person's a bad guy. And it could be, you know, the 100th out of 100, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. When I give that power to you, I'm not giving it to Brian McMonagle. I'm not giving it to Jim DiOrio. I am giving it to fucking everyone who comes after them. So when you talk about AR-15s, dude, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know why the fuck someone needs that. However, I know how slippery slopes work, and someone who's not a good person like you, I think, will take it much farther than that.
Yeah, I hear you. It just seems like the 10th man's always getting a hold of the AR-15, you know, and you know, I always think that society has to adjust to its problems. You know, I mean, the framers of our Constitution didn't envision some of the things we live with today on any number of levels, and it both sides of it, conservative, liberal, either way. And so when somebody throws in my face the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, come on. It's 2022. We got big problems. We got to deal with them. Let's be a grown-up in the room. You know, you're right. You can abridge freedoms, and it's the beginning of an end. Something tells me this country's smart enough, democratic enough to deal with it. And I just, you know, at some point, enough is enough. We've seen enough of it to know, and we're seeing enough of it to know that we got to fix it somehow. And I don't think the fix is in the mental health system, because that's a bridge too far. So there's an easier.
Why?
Because we live in a democratic society, and we have problems now. We have problems now where there are mentally ill people that we want to commit and need to be committed. We can't commit under our laws. Can't involuntarily commit people. Can't, you know. So why? Because it's against our Constitution. It's against the laws we've created. So how are we going to fix the penniless mental health system, really, in our country? We're going to fix that, but we'll spend money toward that, but we won't take away somebody's ability to get an AR-15. You know, to me, when they start making these arguments, I always come back to common sense, and common sense tells me there's an easy way to deal with some of these problems. It's not the way that the far right or the far left ever wants.
Yes.
It's the way that people and I would deal with like you and I would deal with it. Like somebody with half a brain would deal with it. Say, you know what? I don't want anybody taking anybody's right to bear an arm. I don't. I really think it's horrible that we would ask of that. We're asking now. We're asking if it saves one kid's life. I'm asking now. Go take that shotgun out there and knock yourself out. You got the 38 in the house. You got any ability you want to have weapons. We're gonna give police officers a chance. Many of the people that are against removing some of these assault rifles are very conservative minded. They love police officers. You love police officers? Take them off the street. Give them a chance.
It does come down to the whole, you give up something, then how much? And we have crowds that are like, I'm not going to give up a single thing. And then we got crowds who are like, take it all away. Where you make the point about the Constitution, though, is I think where we need to live. You said something really, really deep there that I'm not sure if you know what you said. So if I interpreted this wrong, correct me. But you were talking about how it's too, this was made a long time ago. And so we have to things do change. We have to have some room for change. I agree. I think that the crowd who says rip up the Constitution is insane. I think it's the greatest legal document ever written.
As do I.
I also recognize it was written in 1783, 89, right. All that time, right? That's right. So, yeah, they didn't have AR-15s back then. They didn't have these issues. We do have to be able to change it. Otherwise, we would still consider black people three-fifths of a person.
There you go.
Right? So where do we draw the line here? And how do we do it? What I don't want to lose when we're having this conversation, though, on a given issue like weapons and that are AR-15s or other automatic weapons, things like that, it's like an AR-15 semi-automatic. But still, either way, death machines. When we're having that conversation, I don't also want to not have the conversations about other things, though, too. Like, why are a lot of these school shooters 17, 18, 19 years old, sometimes they're a little younger, too, who have access because they're able to buy the gun at 18 when, even though I disagree with it, we have a drinking law, it's 21 in this country, who secondly also are usually hop the fuck up on SSRIs and crazy pills that doctors are giving out like candy. These are conversations that people don't want to have, but okay, let's have the gun conversation. Cool. Well, let's have the other one too. Because how do we have a profile. We have a profile of a shooter.
Oh, yeah.
How do we stop this type of person from existing?
Oh, yeah. And a better way to skin the cat, for sure, but no one's figured out a way to do it. So much of this stuff is to me, always centers around, I hear all this all the time, the expression, the community has to raise the child. I've never been a big believer in that nonsense. You need parents to raise children.
Yes.
And neighbors and friends to be aware. And I see so often in those kinds of cases the cries for help, whether it be on social media, the medicating of these kids, the access to drugs, as you say, and the like, and everybody's asleep at the wheel. And that's why I was talking about the mental health system. We could certainly blame the mental health system, but what is the mental health system? It's a system within our country. Our people live here. We make the laws. We create the laws. We vote. We have access to the ability to make changes. Nobody wants to do it. It's all bureaucratic. But if somebody's at home paying attention, it shouldn't happen. And since they're not, like with crime, like with everything else, we got to do things that are unpleasant, whether it be changing the ability of an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old to get a gun. We don't want to do it. Got to do it.
I'm with that.
Got to do it.
That one.
Got to do it. Got to start somewhere. And guess what? The more things change, sometimes the more they stay the same. You'll make changes, and then 4 years from now, 8 years from now, depending upon who's got the votes, it changes. But what I've seen over the last 10 years with these kinds of violent attacks, I never thought I would see in my lifetime. We had different problems, issues when we were kids. The things, and to your point about the Constitution, you got to move with the times. You got to have an answer, for the enemy. And sometimes the enemy is right in front of you. You just can't see it.
Well, I like how you have also, like, as your careers progressed, you have started to see, as you've pointed out, like some of these things that are wrong with the system. And one theme that you've been hitting on a bunch today that I haven't asked about directly is the whole environment thing. You said a line maybe an hour ago where you were like, I prosecuted people who didn't grow up like you, Julian, or didn't grow up like I did. Roof over my head, 2 parents, decent life, nothing to worry about. Not even being rich, just comfortable. You don't have to worry about where the next meal's coming from. You don't have a dad who's in prison, and you don't have a home environment that's untenable. Now, there's some people who live in suburbia where that absolutely isn't the case. There's exceptions to everything, but by and large, when you're prosecuting someone who grew up in a home where their father was never there, their mother's working 3 jobs just to try to pay the bills, basically, and they never had a prayer. When they do something really bad at 19 because there was no other chance in hell that they could be a part of a good surrounded group of friends, they were around bad people because there was no hope in life. Now I know you have that empathy, but as a prosecutor, when you were young, did you have any empathy for that?
Well, I mean, you can't have empathy for the act if you're going to be a prosecutor. And that's not what you're asking me.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're prosecuting the act, and the actor. And one of the things that I always say is the person who's there, who's committed this unpardonable act, do they ever deserve a second chance? Do they have the ability to ever appreciate the value of human life? There are some people, quite frankly, that don't. They would take and extinguish a human life as quickly as they would step on a bug, and that will never change. And there are others who, quite frankly, are in the wrong place at the wrong time, who, if given the chance, if given the opportunity, could be a law-abiding, productive citizen. That's why I always go back to discretion. Mandatory sentences are for the simple-minded view that we're just going to punish the act and not the actor. There are some acts, though, I will tell you, no matter what the age of the individual, that are unpardonable. You walk into a school and you assassinate countless children. As a prosecutor, who's now 60-something.
I wasn't going to tell anyone.
Something.
That's your fault.
With a lot of wisdom and a lot of rubber, on the road. I could walk in and prosecute him and sleep like a baby, knowing that he will spend the rest of his life tucked away.
Would you defend him?
I've never done such a thing, and don't think I could bring my best to bear. There are some cases that I'm pretty, I think there's a chink in the armor. Elderly, kids, I don't know that I trust myself enough to bring the fastball that needs to be brought all the time, and I just defer because I have the luxury of doing it. That's why I talk about public defenders all the time. The case comes in, they got to say yes. I don't. And there are some cases that I believe are different from others. You commit a terrorist act, you need another lawyer. That ain't going to be me. But, again, it's hypocritical in some ways. I have somebody, hey, you're a hypocrite. My God, you've defended countless murderers. I say, yeah, I've met them. I can't, I see good in them. I don't see depravity in the act itself. You walk in and you commit a senseless slaughter. You've thought about that. And your mind is in a way that I really don't. I think I'm good enough sometimes to win cases I got no business winning. I got no interest in winning them.
Cheryl, the woman you talked about earlier, who we've brought up a bunch of times, it's just great to go off that one because that was such a perfectly put example to use against other things as like a foil. But that one makes a ton of sense, as we said, because it's a crime of passion in that way. It's wrong, but it's not the same. It's nothing like going in and massacring kids in a school. Agreed.
I've warned my wife if she ever, had an affair like that, she'd have to die.
But you had another one, and there's been a lot. You defended, you said this, so you defended mob guys. I guess
Sure have.
you talking about that on the record. I didn't know if you were going to be able to say that out loud. But,
Sure.
Okay.
Alleged mob.
There we go. We got the alleged in there. But that is different to me. It's wrong, but it's different because the guys who are in that world, they know what they signed up for. Now, if one of them fucks around and kills a citizen, that's a different story. But there is a different... I don't want to take away anything from... you take a life, you got to go away. It's wrong. But there is... They chose that life, and it ends in the can or it ends in 6 feet below, right? Whereas when we're talking about people that commit senseless acts, Cheryl being passion... Another guy who you defended, who did get found guilty, I forget his name, but, staged a suicide of his girlfriend, right? So this was, I guess back in 2011, he killed his girlfriend and then hung a wire around her neck and they made it believe that it was a suicide. So when you're talking about some people you defend, and again, you do the job. There's something else I'm going to want to ask here, but I want to stay with this for a second.
Yep.
You did go in and defend that guy. That's about as premeditated as it gets to me. And so I don't see, there is still a chasm between that and a terrorist or child killing and stuff like that, but it's not a big one.
No, and there's so many cases like that I have been involved in, and in the one that you've just referenced, this is an individual who, to this moment, maintains his innocence. A case in which the original investigation revealed that it was a suicide. 2 forensic pathologists called it a suicide. So
they called Jeffrey Epstein a suicide, though, too.
I mean, listen, I hear you, but I will tell you, I really think that was a defensible case, and I do believe that guy had a right to maintain his innocence and still does, and defended it and deserved a defense, as contrasted with what I'm talking about, which is, hey, listen, I did it.
Yeah.
I did. I hung her. And I'm glad I did it. I drove into the World Trade Center and glad I did it. I wore the backpack in Boston and did it. I walked into the school or the movie theater and did it. I got nothing for that guy. I got no interest in that guy. Those people embrace the crimes they commit. Those people have no interest in whether or not people can survive. They don't quarrel with the fact that they did it. And so what do they need me for? And I got no interest in being there.
Do you ask your clients if they're guilty?
Yeah, I ask them to tell me the truth about what happened. Sure. How am I going to defend them if I don't know the truth?
Have you ever had someone say yes?
Sure.
Of something serious? Sure. And then you went in and defended them?
Sure, I'm obligated to. What I'm not permitted to do is to ask somebody what happened and they tell you they did it and then put them up on a witness stand and they say they didn't. That I'm ethically barred from doing. But I really believe a lawyer has to know the truth. What if somebody says to me, I didn't do it, and I'm in Chicago, I was in Chicago or somewhere else, and you go and you put a defense on that is completely based on fallacy. How are you going to? What are you really accomplishing? And for the people that will tell me they did it, quite often you're trying to work out plea bargains for them. You're trying to resolve the cases for them and say, okay, you did it. Give me the circumstances why. What happened? What went down? You work out a deal. Some of those cases go to trial. Listen, if I, everybody makes a big deal about the issue. So my God, I've seen videos of clients that have committed crimes that I've had to defend. If criminal defense lawyers only defended the people that either maintain their innocence or were innocent, there wouldn't be a lot of cases tried.
And you're just saying, to finish that all off, you've been saying that there is still like some high line there that like you can't be the guy for, but like if it's a certain crime,
just on a personal level.
Right.
I mean, we're all human beings. I mean, and it's a bit of a cop out because a lot of the real great criminal defense lawyers of all time don't have those issues. They see it very, very, very simply. There's a defense. There's somebody's entitled to that defense, and you got to be there for them. And I truly believe in that. I think in every case, there needs to be an adversarial system, and someone needs to be defended. It just don't got to be me.
Right. Right.
That's all. I'm a big boy, and I get to pick. Quite frankly, because I think I've earned it. What cases I take and what cases I don't. And there are some that I quite frankly don't think I can be at my best, and quite frankly, some that I have no interest in defending. I just there are some things that I'm so appalled by on a humanitarian level, for whatever reason, right? That if I'm telling the truth, I'm sickened by it. So sickened by it, as opposed to maybe some other cases like you're describing. Well, how come you're not sickened by them? I don't know. But I am. So why be untrue to myself? Why be untrue to the client? I mean, why walk in there and you're thinking, well, I can't even stomach being seated in the room with this person. That person deserves better than that. And there are a couple of cases, and there are a handful of them. I think I just ticked them off for you. But you want to go in and commit a crime of mass destruction, you're gonna need somebody who's a little bit more noble than me.
It is
just telling you the truth.
Well, yeah, because you use the example like the person who raises their hand and say, I did it. Yeah, I want attention for it, whatever, which is the most blatant example. But you talk about not being able to be at your best because they're admitting to it and everything.
No, it's not the admission. It isn't the admission that bothers me. It's the embracing of it. It was the desire to do it. I mean, some people, they'll make a horrible mistake. They'll get so furious at a spouse. They'll kill a spouse. We've talked about that. And yet, when I see people who simply have no regret, no remorse, and commit senseless slaughter, I choose not to. I've had cases, quite frankly, that I was asked to get involved with that I didn't get involved with that would have made me an enormous amount of money or got me an enormous amount of popularity. Mm-hmm. Selfishly, if I wanted to, help my career a little bit more, I could have taken them. I took a pass. And had people, quite frankly, people saying, what the hell are you doing? I'm like, man.
So, and we, obviously that's all attorney-client privilege, so we can't know who those are. Yeah. But inherently, when I look at this, I do often think about, well, I wonder what ones he is passing up and why he chose this one over that one, because maybe they were going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's like, the level of objectivity you have to do that when is on, like, when they actually told you, is actually on a whole different level than what I was referring to earlier.
It's not something that anybody who doesn't do it can understand, or I would expect them to, quite frankly. And guess what? If I didn't do what I do, I wouldn't be able to appreciate it or understand it either. You mean to tell me, Brian, that you can go in there and defend somebody that you know is guilty? Absolutely. And
for the worst crime.
For the worst crimes imaginable. And they're guilty, Brian, but you go in there and you don't just go in there, Brian. You don't just go in there and mail it in. You go in there and fight like hell. Yep, that's the system. Only way the system can work. Because if I'm not there, for those folks, those clients of mine that did do it, how am I going to be there for those that didn't? And who am I, to judge so often? Because so many, quite frankly, when you ask the question, did you do it, are going to tell you no. 90-some% of them are going to, probably close to 100% of them are going to say, oh, it wasn't me.
You probably have a good hit ratio, though, like from reading people.
Do I know?
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
You're asking me if they've told me.
But there's still that level of doubt.
Oh, yeah. Well, but you shouldn't. You can't look at it that way. That's the slippery slope that lawyers fall off on. Well, I had some. No, you didn't. You knew. They had to tell you. You knew. It was one of the biggest difficulties I had doing criminal defense work when I made the switch, was the understanding that in many, many cases, if I won, in some measure, society lost. in some measure.
I don't.
And yet I have to have the principle steeped into the depths, driven into the depths of my mind that says, no, society really won because you're there to put government to the test so that they don't get it wrong for the innocent man who does come down the pike. Guess what? That's a beautiful principle. It's what kind of the entire structure of the criminal justice system is built on, right? But try sleeping on that. And that's why they invented wine.
I didn't see that last line coming. That was good. But what you're talking about here is not, you're talking about being able to ignore the anecdotal for the greater good. And the concept that under the Constitution, a great thing that's written into it is that the government can't be all powerful. It can't be like Russia or China and like you go in there, you're guilty.
Yeah,
right?
The greater good is really accomplished by the adversarial system, by the defense, by the lawyer who's willing to go in there and say, I always say that everybody wants to talk about who's the greatest lawyer. The greatest lawyers in America are the ones that defend indefensible causes. That's the fundamental precept of the criminal justice system. I'm just not one of them. I'm not one of them. I'm more of kind of a reduced version of that because they're the lawyers that just they'll stand next to the bomber in Boston and fight like hell for them, and they are really embracing the philosophical greater good. That's not me. Right.
So they just, again, they just don't have the hard line somewhere really high. But to be clear, again, like I'm really surprised. Whenever I ask, and I've talked to defense attorneys before, they say you don't ask. Like I've never talked to a guy who said I will often ask, and like,
I don't ask him if they did. I ask him what happened. What can you tell me? It's not did you do it, but you really need. How are you going to defend somebody? Like if they're accused of doing something, but where were you that night? What did you do? I mean, you got to get into it. How are you going to defend him? You just going to sit there like a mope?
No, that's so.
True. I'm not saying that of you, but yeah, a lot of people say, "What do you mean you asked him?" What do you mean I asked him? What am I going to do? Not ask him? I mean,
so you don't necessarily lean in and go, "Did you do it?" You don't do it like that.
Yeah. Just
but, okay.
blink once.
Okay.
No, I don't do that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's some level of being able to deny through objectivity there, where you still know in your head, but you haven't really asked. So at least there's something there. But
again, remember this. People get confused with guilt or innocence all the time, and I remember a lawyer once telling me this, and it makes perfect sense. Our system of justice isn't built, in terms of burdens of proof and everything else, in disproving the possibility of innocence. You have to understand that. I mean, there's a burden of proof with us, and we want that burden. It's the highest burden of proof of any court anywhere in the world. And we keep it high with the belief that if we keep it really, really high, we'll never put an innocent man or woman or person on death row. So that's really you're a gatekeeper, and put them to their proofs. That's why I say, in theory, the system works, because I'm putting the prosecutor to his proofs. The prosecutor is proving it like hell, like he or she should. And somewhere in that, justice should come. If you got enough evidence to convict somebody, convict them. And if you don't, you don't. I mean, a lot of people, get away with crimes. They're never charged. Mm-hmm. Couldn't solve the crime. Couldn't find the evidence. There wasn't enough evidence. There's countless cases like that. The system is when they bring a crime. They bring a charge. And the only way that system works is it's got to be an adversary system. Now, does that taste well to people? Until they're charged, until a family member is charged, or until, God forbid, they or a family member are falsely accused. And then the system makes a hell of a lot of sense to them.
Yes, and that's why it balances out, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You had said, though, in there somewhere where it's like you'll see people for the person behind there, right? So maybe
in many instances, I can. That's one of the nice things about having done this, on this side. I see more of it than not, quite frankly. There's a human being in there, and in many instances, particularly for some of these young people, just chances that were never given, home lives that are horrific. Think about your worst case, example, and then multiply it by 100.
Yes.
And then some glimpses at their humanity where they'll do something and you'll think, wow, like that's not a loss there. That's not a complete loss there. There's a pulse there. There's a heart there. There's emotions there. Now, there are some, just sadly enough.
Now, how can you be at your best when you know that?
Well, because they might be innocent, number one. And number two, that's your job. My job is to always be at my best. I mean, and on an intellectual level, are there times where you're not? I suppose there are. But if I walk in there and I'm not, man, I've committed the greatest sin a lawyer can ever commit. That's why I don't sign up for every case.
Sure.
Because if I'm going to blink, like we talked about blinking before, where people can blink under pressure. If I'm going to blink, and I know I'm going to blink, you don't need me there. That's when the system fails, because then you really run the risk of an innocent person getting convicted. So I got to be there, guns a-blazing, and if I can't, for whatever reason, again, and I know enough about myself to know what my vulnerabilities are as a human being, and there are some things that hit closer to home than others. Every human being's like that. Every lawyer's like that, whether they tell you or not. Someone will probably tell you, no, bullshit.
They're humans.
And so I kind of know where those places are, and sometimes I need to hear about it to know about it. And I'll just go, not me, not this time.
Do you have a button? Like, do you go into the office, you work for the day, you leave, you pull out in your car, button.
Wow.
Now I'm home.
Quite the opposite. That's the problem with this life. I think if you are able to do it for a long time, if you're able to press a button and turn this stuff off, I think you're going to live a lot longer. You're going to have a far happier home life, but you won't be a good lawyer. You can't be. If you don't take this stuff home and you don't live with it and it doesn't keep you up at night, and you don't think about it. And when I'm on trial, I mean, I'm a zombie. I'm the most worthless person in my personal life, my home life that you could even imagine. I have a very wonderful and patient wife and great family who just, are willing to ignore me for those time periods, but I can't turn it off. And that's why this isn't for everybody. Because it's an impossibility. If you want to do it successfully and care enough about your craft and care enough about, getting it right, and I don't go in there to lose. I ain't gonna lie to you, no matter who they are. And you wanna do it right. And I would think that would be probably pretty consistent with most professions. I don't know. I'm only in this one, but
I agree. Yeah.
You wanna. I mean, I've interacted with other professions in this profession, and I've seen the people that operate at the highest levels, and they, if you even uttered the word, "Do you have a button?" They'd lob your head off. I mean, they're like, "What do you mean button? I'm 24/7, man." I've gotten a little bit better at it. We've got a great family, and so as I kind of got through my profession a little bit more, I was able to make sure that no matter what was going on, I had time to go, watch ball games and watch my son play football or baseball, my daughters play lacrosse and tennis, and be there in their special moments. But you lose a lot of them, and that's with any profession. I'm not whining. There are people that are working 10 times harder than I am.
Again, I can't relate to how I would react because I never wanted to be a lawyer in the first place.
Lucky you.
Right? Yeah. I say the same thing.
Lucky you.
I think the world's got too many of them.
Yes.
That's just me.
Yeah.
But it is still so necessary, and the human element is you're a victim of the burden you have to carry with that too. But you believe in the higher system so much that you're willing to do it, and that's why I respect it. I just probably what makes you one of the best attorneys to ever do it if I could use one example, one of the greatest arguments I've ever heard in my life, I will never forget this for the rest of my life, where I was reading it. I think it was TMZ who broke it when the Cosby mistrial happened, where you got him the mistrial and they didn't know if they were going to retry it yet or anything like that. But the news came across. I haven't been able to find the article because they may have archived it, but when it first happened, TMZ broke it, and I was in my office, and my boss, we were about to go to lunch, and he was walking by, and I'm like, they just got a hung jury with Cosby. And he goes, oh, that's the guy you know, right? I said, yeah. And so I start reading it, and the way you went in there was you had argued it was a vicious case. There was a lot going on in there, but you get to the closing arguments, and at this point, obviously, you're not a guy who puts his face all over the media like you were saying earlier in your career you would have. But the jury of 12 people there, they know this is Bill Cosby in that room. Yeah. They know Bill Cosby don't have a public defender defending him. Yeah. Like, you're a subtle guy. You're not like a flashy dresser, but they know that suit probably doesn't cost $2, and it's not from Joseph A. Bank.
That's right.
And you got up there after this long case of going back and forth, and you're known, for example, as a guy who's like one of the greatest cross-examiners to ever live, right? So you have some intense moments in there. You're going back and forth. You're taking some expert witnesses and putting them in a goddamn like spin cycle. You get up there though, and you look this jury in the eyes as Bill Cosby's attorney, and you said something to the effect of, "I haven't been able to sleep because I have been a bad lawyer in this case. I have argued the worst. This is the easiest case. I have argued the worst case ever, and this great man over here is going to pay with his reputation and years of his life and go to prison because his lawyer's bad. So for the love of Jesus Christ and everything holy, will you not fucking hold that against him, and will you hold it against his horrible attorney?" And I can't see these jurors, but my boss is on the ground laughing like, what a motherfucker. And I can just picture like 12 people who are no disrespect, too dumb to get out of jury duty, sitting there going, what the fuck? Did this dude just... Bill Cosby hired a bit? Did he not do it? Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh, am I going to put that... He's a good comedian. Am I going to put him in jail? Is this motherfucker... Is he messing with me? He's fucking with me, right? He's fucking with me. No, my God. You know what? Let's just get a hung jury. And you get a W out of it.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's funny because I had for years gone back and forth with what are the best ways to deal with the obvious in terms of jurors and reaching them. And you don't know, quite frankly, when you try a case, how many jurors you either pissed off, had fall in love with you, hate you to the rest of time. You don't know where you stand. You also probably made a mistake a time or two during the trial, quite frankly. But I always have used that piece of it, and it wasn't quite as well put as you put it. But it's the idea that I'm flawed. I've always believed that you have to connect with jurors. And in cases where they may not want to identify with your client, and Cosby wasn't one of them, they could easily, I think some of the older jurors identify with him, you really want to connect with them yourself so that maybe they'll give it to you for you.
Why do you think they identify with him, the older jurors?
Because think about the greater good that he accomplished in his lifetime. At one point in time, he was more popular than Ronald Reagan. He gave back to his community. He was one of the most charitable benefactors of Temple University. He fought for law and order, trying to bring people up through his career. He was, for all intents and purposes, probably one of the great Americans until this fall.
But also, like Jimmy Savile over in Britain, you could say the same thing.
No, you could,
right?
But
remember,
look what
he did.
But remember this: jurors were being asked to make a decision about whether he did it. And that case was, at least the way we tried it, the time we tried it, I thought a very defensible case on the facts, on the allegation. And I thought there was reasonable doubt all over of that case. And so I directed my closing toward those jurors who had a memory of him for all the good that he did, of all the things that were important to them. I mean, think about it. I mean, people went to sleep watching Bill Cosby. People brought him into their living rooms. Bill Cosby created a way for the world to really maybe rethink their racism in many respects. And so I always thought that had to be the way that we were going to win that case, if we were going to win that case. And coming back to me and why I always use the, piece that I'll usually throw into a closing about me, which is, hey, listen, I suffer many curses and many failures and many weaknesses, and maybe this guy deserved a better lawyer, but he doesn't have me anymore. Now he has you. And you got to do your jobs better than maybe I did mine. You want to kind of bring jurors to their best and make them realize that in a few short moments when the case is given to them, they're all that stands between him and a conviction for a crime he didn't commit, is the argument. And so I probably did that a little bit inartfully in that case. I remember reading headlines.
Inartfully? That was an Oscar-winning performance. They bought it.
I remember one of the articles, because they were, the press was, the press was against us. That's what made that case so impossible to win, was when we went to pick a jury in Pittsburgh on that case. They asked, every single night was, Nightline, Dateline, women falling, all over the place saying that they'd been victimized. And 96 out of 100 jurors had heard it all. And so you were picking a jury that had been, now all of a sudden overnight asked to accept the fact that this was a serial, predator, and trying to overcome that perception that was created in the media and both news and television. And that was the challenge of the case. And it was a challenge that we certainly embraced. But, you talk about handling the media and that was a classic example of it being an absurdity, thinking that we were ever going to change public opinion pre-trial or in press conferences or anything like that. That ship had gone. That ship was lost. We had to do all our winning in the courtroom. And ironically, the great thing about, one great pride I take in the lawyering in that case, the first motion that we argued in that case was that the case should have never been prosecuted because of the promise that had been made by a prior prosecutor not to prosecute him, which led him to a deposition that would be his undoing. And while it was denied in the state court after we hung the jury, and then it was tried by other lawyers a second time, and they were unsuccessful, and he was convicted. Yeah,
because to be clear, you got the hung jury, and then you resigned as his attorney.
Right. Well, it was a mutual parting. Believe me, it wasn't. There was a obviously at the end of the first trial there were some issues with respect to public comments that were being made about the system and the judges and the prosecutors that I just wasn't going to go down that road. And to their credit, the Cosby family had their views of the system and the people that were prosecuting them, and they thought they should bring some people in from out of town to try to burn the village down. And it didn't burn, quite frankly. And the case was lost, but then on appeal, the issue that led to the reversal and his exoneration was that issue that he had made the promise. The prosecutor made a promise, and he should have kept it, and he didn't. So, case dismissed. And
was there a legality there though, or was that a true judge's ruling? Like this was unethical on the part of the prosecution. You can't be telling citizens and their attorneys something and then revoke your word.
It's the latter. You're really right on it. It's the latter. It's almost like a common law fundamental principle of fairness that you can't make promises as a prosecutor that people will rely on to their detriment and then use what they relied on to their detriment against them in a criminal prosecution. So it was really a case of first impression. And so it was an amazing experience, quite frankly, from beginning to end. I could go on and on and on for days talking about that case. The case, we tried that case in 5 days. The jury deliberated 4 or 5 days before deadlocking. And they were the 5, longest days of my life. I mean, you're sitting there waiting for a jury to come back. They were working like 12-hour days, and you're just sitting there thinking, "Oh God, this is it. I'm gonna be the guy that loses the Bill Cosby case,
or I'm gonna be the guy that wins the Bill Cosby
guy that wins
case."
it. Yeah, that would have been nice, quite frankly, too. But it wasn't meant to be.
So here's the thing. All the things you said about Cosby and societal effect with his greatness as a comedian and all that can all be true. And again, where I give you the credit is that this is how the system works. And you decided to take the case and you're defending him and you have to do your job. But like, if he were guilty, and you're not going to say one way or the other because obviously you represented the guy. So I don't expect you to say it on camera and people are going to have to understand that at home. But if he were, we weren't just talking about Andrea Constant, or however you pronounce her last name, who was the woman who was the key central accuser there. We're talking about a slew of drugging women with GHB and raping them, which we talked about premeditation earlier. Holy shit, man. That is some premeditation to the nth degree. And again, he maintains his innocence to this day and everything. But, I struggle with this one a lot, man. Like, I went to bed. Who the fuck cares what I think? But when the whole Deshaun Watson thing came out, that was very sketchy. That attorney on the other side, Busby, there's a lot of sketchy shit going on there. And so I've always been one who I'm much more likely, the burden of proof is on, tell me that the woman's wrong. Like, I'm believing that. But on that one, I'm like, this one smells. It smells so bad. And again, he's never been convicted of a crime. 2 grand juries came back and said no, right? Which, to me, when I first saw that, I was like, the burden of proof for a grand jury is you just need one juror to be like, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So true.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Could have. Yeah. It's not like a trial.
Yeah.
And he's not in there to defend himself either.
That's right. There's no defense. Yeah.
And they brought, in the first grand jury, they brought 9 witnesses to tell their story. And 30 jurors, whatever it was. Not one of them was like, maybe. So I'm like, at that point, I'm like, this was a total setup for this guy. And then you see some of the stuff come out. And some of the stuff that's inarguable. Like, I think it was like 67 massage parlors in 17 months. Text messages, all this shit. And then you're like, you hear the accusations and you're like, even if 20% of that's true, I'm not saying the guy's a full-blown rapist, but like, this is fucked up. And so I even question myself because I'm like, God damn it, the one time I take the guy's side, like, blows up in my face. Gotta own it. It appears that way. And so I see something like Cosby, and this is a powerful man. This is a guy where stuff had followed him around for a long time. This case was he got a promise he wasn't going to get prosecuted. Why did he get a promise? Right? Is that because of his connections, things like that? Same guy that wants to burn a village down, like you said. And so we're talking about someone abusing, allegedly, a position where he was, especially given the time and the era, like he was able, if true, able to do that at will. And so when people in the court of, and we'll talk about the court of public opinion too, that's another thing, but like when people in the court of public opinion see so much smoke around the fire and they say there's a fire, and then they see you go in and defend that and say, yeah, I'm in there to win. I get it, because I understand how you have to look at it. But like, is this a guy that you're going to take home around your, maybe not now, you wouldn't care because he's fucking 80 years old and can't see. He's out of shape. But like, if you knew him 20 years ago, would you want him near your daughters?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And it's a question I never have to answer, quite frankly, because if I answered that question for every one of my clients, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. Any lawyer who does criminal defense work isn't making personal judgments against people they defend based on the allegations. And, you got to go back to where I began with all this, which is this is a guy who vehemently denied that accusation. He was on trial for that accusation. The case I tried, you couldn't get 12 jurors to agree whether there was even proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it, let alone coming to the inescapable conclusion that he did it.
Because he had such a bad lawyer, too.
Well, there was that. There was that. But, you got to keep going back to the fact that if everybody's all right about something. Go back to the Simpson case. People want to talk about the Cosby case. Talk about the Simpson case. I said earlier it changed the world. So
yeah, elaborate on that.
Yeah, so Simpson, Simpson was probably the greatest example of circumstantial evidence of guilt. Maybe not the greatest, but one of the greatest that I've ever seen.
Can you, to people who don't understand what that means, can you just explain
Yeah,
that?
so, nobody saw O.J. Simpson kill anybody, right? But the circumstantial evidence was pretty, I thought, fatal to him in that case, and would have thought fatal to him if I had prosecuted that case with, his DNA, a bloody glove back at his house, this, that, motive out the wazoo. And a pretty unshakable, quite frankly, circumstantial case. And I always say the difficult thing about Cosby was nobody wanted to believe O.J. Simpson committed that crime that knew O.J. Simpson at the time of that trial. Because his public opinion, his life, he as a spokesperson, as an athlete, there was never anything at all at the time of his trial that suggested he was capable of that crime, was there? Nothing. Up until the time of his trial, the charge.
Well, there were allegations. The one thing was there were allegations that he had hit his wife. I think they had some sort of court.
So forgive me.
Okay.
You're right. There was that. But contrast that with Cosby. At the time we went on trial, every magazine in the world had written that he was a sexual predator in cases completely different or not different, but separate and apart from the case we were trying. So I always said, trying the Cosby case would have been like trying the Simpson case, except that in the Simpson case, everybody in the jury would have been told that he'd committed 10 other murders besides Nicole and Ron, who he was charged with murdering. That was the challenge of the Cosby case. And one of the things that I learned in watching the Simpson case was that nobody, and I mean nobody, is incapable of being acquitted. Nobody. I remember when that verdict came in, thinking to myself, well, now a lot of speculation has gone into the fact that the reason he was acquitted was where he tried the case and what kind of jury he had and all that kind of good stuff. But Simpson really, I thought, changed the way cases were defended, how they were defended. And the lawyers who were involved in that case probably engaged in some of the greatest lawyering in the history of criminal defense. Put aside what you wanted to happen or didn't happen or everything, and brought people to their best.
He also had the greatest team
ever. He had the greatest team ever assembled, and they were all remarkable. And so, again, as a lawyer, it's always in the challenge. It's always in the challenge. And, there were great challenges in Cosby that I thought probably could have never been overcome except by a legal, maybe a legal defense, which ultimately proved to be the case. But we certainly tried like hell.
When they wrote that Constitution with a feather pen, or whatever the fuck it was called, back in the 1700s, they didn't have a mass media. That was another thing they didn't have.
No, they didn't.
They didn't have, forget print media, like they had that, but, Paul Revere had to ride with a horse like 6 hours just to tell people the fucking British were coming, right? Like that's the world we were living in. So you could have some sort of lack of a mob mentality. Not to say it didn't exist, it absolutely did, but in smaller doses, right? Now, the Me Too Twitter era, like you're going to have a not mob mentality across the entire United States of the USA, when Cosby's going on. I agree. But do you think that based on how the Constitution's written, which is right to a fair trial, jury of your peers who are unbiased to the situation, meaning they are also unknowing to anything that has been reported around it or known, do you think that's even possible?
Well, not only is it not possible, but it's not even the law. Jurors are permitted to have read about the case and know about the case. They're then asked the question, if they answer that question in the affirmative, okay, knowing what you know, would you be able to accept my instructions that you're to put it aside and presume him innocent anyway, which is an absurdity.
Wait, I didn't even know this.
Oh yeah, I mean, we otherwise we'd be able to get rid of jurors who simply had read about the case or heard about the case for cause. When you pick a jury, particularly in Pennsylvania, in a non-capital case, you get 7 strikes. That means I can strike 7 people just for the love of it. Just for the love of it.
Go fuck yourself.
Oh, yeah, get lost. I don't like your outfit. I didn't like Marilyn Monroe. So,
that's a crime.
Well, I'm lying. But you know what I mean? Like any reason, how they're dressed, whatever. And that's it. And then you're out of strikes. So we're always looking for challenges for cause. We're always looking for a reason to cause someone to go that we don't want. So in the Cosby case, just about every juror that sat on that jury had read everything they ever try getting a fair shake under those circumstances. So
they had admitted to having read about it.
Of course, I read about it.
That's what I didn't know.
Oh, but they got to say the magic words. But I could be fair. Yeah, right.
Sure you can, pal.
Sure you can.
That makes it even
I'm a
worse,
lousy
though.
lawyer too.
That makes it even. That makes that closing even more legendary.
Yeah.
The fact that they all said, "Yeah, I know who Bill Cosby is," even if we know they did. Like they even admitted it out loud, and you still
Sure
went
they
up
did.
there and said, "Yeah, he's paying me $2 an hour. I'm a jerk off. I have not." Listen. Innocent, guilty.
Let me say one other thing though. While I'm thinking of it, I'm going to tell you a quick story, and it's funny. I'm wearing this watch right now. So, right, you're looking at this watch. See it? Same watch. So I'm trying this case, and yes, it was an alleged mob case. And it turned out to be a...
Narducci?
No, it wasn't Narducci. And it turned out to be a mistrial. Something happened with the jurors.
Oh,
It turned out
Nicodemo.
Nicodemo.
This is my favorite argument ever. Go
So
ahead.
they interview the jurors afterwards that didn't, because of the mistrial, they didn't get a chance to vote. And one of the women, and I know she didn't like me very much, or just didn't like the case very much, maybe. And she was interviewed after the case, and she said, "Well, it seemed to me that man must have been involved with the mob or something because his lawyer was wearing a watch that cost more than my house." That's me.
That watch?
And see this? This was a gift from a client of mine. It cost $100. So you see how wrong you can be about.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like. I was gonna say like for a guy who's done what you have. Like, that's a nice
Why not have the
watch.
Rolex? Why not have the Rolex? But you see, you can even lose being humble. Is where I'm going with this. But yeah, I'll never forget that. I'm like, it's $100 watch, but it was a gift, so I wear it from time to time.
I mean, that underscores the human judgment of this stuff.
It's exactly
Like
right.
again, I know
Can't
you.
win.
I know you
Can't win.
I know you have to love juries because you're like they're diplomatic, citizen, whatever. But again, like. It's not hard to get out of shit. I found jury duty requests that were like a year old in my mail a couple times. I was like, oh shit, no one came and got me.
Yeah.
My one friend, this was bad. My one friend, he's like, oh, I got the perfect thing to get out of jury duty. I won't say where he lives, but he lives in a place where they'll come after you.
Yeah.
Like if you do it. And he said, I have this shirt. It says, I heart my 2 dads. I wear it real tight. I walk in there and they go, he just looks like a loose screw. You're struck. And I'm like, this is not hard to get out of this shit. So like these people.
It really isn't hard.
These people, it's like, who are you dealing with? But
some of them, I got news for you. I tried a case right after COVID. It wasn't even after COVID. It was really still in COVID. And it was out in Harrisburg. And I mean, think about it. All you had to say was, I can't wear a mask, or I can't be in court, or I can't. And not one juror out of like a prospective, I think it must have been about 70 people, raised their hands to get out. They all want it in. I'm not talking about the ones that just got nothing better to do and want to kill a couple of weeks. But there are some people that really, kind of consider it their civic duty. And sometimes they're the ones you got to worry about. As a defense lawyer,
they're active.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're the ones that, I'm here to do justice. So, you got to kind of read it. But, any lawyer who tells you he can figure out jurors and they have jury selection figured out is lying to you.
Whereas when you tried the Martinez case back in the day, that's another thing. And this is another whole issue here. I had on a totally separate, different case. I have Raj Rajaratnam in here,
Oh, yeah.
who talks about the government witness thing.
Yeah.
And obviously that fucked him when that happened, and that's a whole nother thing. But like with the mob, that's always how they have to build the cases, right? Because it's this law of silence and all that. So
Well, until they invented wiretaps. Yeah.
yes, but then still, like, they had wiretaps in this case, but they still had like corroborating people.
Yeah.
And this is where you like made your name, because you get in there and you basically, like, how did this even work? You get in there and you sat on the witness stand talking to the jury as if you were the rat witnesses.
Oh, yeah, in the closing.
And you put on an act like, I'm
Right.
John Veazey. I whacked 7 people. I cut their heads off, put it in an acid can, but believe me, because you know what? I've seen God now.
Yeah.
And that's I guess the only way you could do it. But like when you're arguing that case, and let's say, and you don't have to admit this, but let's say in your head you're like, okay, yeah, I'm representing the fucking underboss of the whole thing. Like, he did this. But are you also like, this case was made, they cheated because they took people who very well are just telling them what they want to hear so they can make the case, and the evidence isn't there. So therefore I need to protect the system by arguing this case because they shouldn't be allowed to do this.
Well, I genuinely believe that informant testimony ought to be taken really with a grain of salt. It is the worst form of evidence you could ever have, because people are inspired to lie. And sometimes people have been liars their entire lives and wouldn't hesitate to lie about someone's innocence or guilt. You rarely see prosecutions, though, that are simply based on that. That case had enormous amounts of wiretap evidence that ultimately was I've said all the time, anybody, any lawyer can cross-examine an informant, whether it be in a mob case or otherwise. You can't cross-examine a tape. And so the Department of Justice is usually pretty smart to realize that, and to realize that if they build a case just on informants alone, they're usually incapable of winning, because jurors don't like it. They don't like it, quite frankly, when that's it. Usually they're smart enough to mix in some devastating wiretaps like they did in that case. And make it a bridge too far. But yeah, they're the easiest. A lot of times I'll be asked to come speak on how to cross-examine informants. Anybody can cross-examine an informant. I mean, they're just walking, talking liars for the most part. That doesn't mean they're lying in this case, but their whole history, they're sometimes murderers, they're sometimes thieves, robbers. They've lied 7 times in their interviews in this case, and now they're supposed to be believed. So it's pretty easy to do it. Sometimes you're artful in doing it. I will tell you that sometimes, though, these informants are good witnesses and challenging, because some of them are street smart, and in some cases a little smarter than the person examining them, quite frankly. So you get lulled into sleep thinking, oh, this will be easy, it's an informant, and then boom. So you got to be careful with it. But I am a big I'm not a big proponent of informant testimony. I've used it. I use it as a prosecutor in prosecuting a mob case, because I think it needs to be bolstered by real evidence, and testimonial evidence can be really shaky at times, and none more shaky than informant testimony.
Now, you've been on the other side of that, though, too, where you were trying cases and you're using witnesses. Sometimes they're not necessarily totally clean themselves, like that. It's just a part of doing the job.
Sure.
It is then on you ethically as a prosecutor. This is where I get into those 9 good guys and 1 bad guy in a room. This is another example of that. It's on you to make a judgment of, okay, I can't have it all the way where people are going to be great, but how much is this person saying what I want to hear versus how much, and because I'm pressuring them, versus how much of it is actually the way I know the facts to be, and I'm being honest with myself about that. Like that Raj case, I think about this all the time, because the star witness in that, there's so many problems. You would have a field day with that. I should introduce you to. You would have a field day with that case. It should have never gone to trial. The guy, is his name G. Robert Blakey, right? The famous professor who wrote the wiretap laws and everything.
Sure. RICO Act.
Yeah, and he wrote RICO. He wrote an amicus brief to the court on his own account. They didn't ask him to, where he said, yeah, you have to throw out this case. The government violated every single thing that we require to get wiretaps. The judge then admitted it in the Franks hearing. He admitted it in court. He said the government lied, right? But I'll keep it. So they kept the wiretaps, which they shouldn't have kept, because wiretaps, like the way the judge explained it in an interview after the trial when he took his cushy job from getting this trial and all the attention, is he said, to be honest, when you're on a wiretap, if you're telling your mom you're coming home for spaghetti that night, people are going to think you're guilty. Anything can sound guilty. But the second layer to it was the witnesses. That's what I want to focus on right now. The star witness of all the witnesses that were sketchy that the government used, the star witness was a really bad guy. This guy, Anil Kumar, he had done a whole bunch of things. I don't need to get into it. But he was a smart guy who had been at McKinsey. He was high up and everything. And as the prosecution said after the case, he was the reason that Raj got convicted. Because he was, they said he was so credible and he put on a performance. The jury, just like some of the guys you were talking about, the jury believed him. 3 years later, Raj's brother, who was way lower in the business, right before the statute of limitations gets pulled, now Raj is in prison, his brother gets charged. While his brother's out of the country on the last day, because the prosecutor's office wanted to make this be like, oh, he's not going to come back now. We'll win the public opinion, the whole bit. We're going after Wall Street, rah, rah. He gets on the first flight back. He's just like, oh, I didn't do shit. Well, it's too bad. We're going to go defend it. So the guy, Anil Kumar, the witness, is now off probation. He got the big fish in prison. Raj is already there. Biggest insider trading conviction of all time in the history of the country to this day. And so, of course, for the same exact trades, insider trades, that Raj was convicted of, they're going to now try his brother on. So who are they going to bring in for the witness? They're going to bring in Anil Kumar, the witness. Long story short, Anil Kumar goes in there and changed his testimony. He said the opposite. And they didn't want to put Raj out of prison because that would take away their whole narrative. So what did they do? His brother was found not guilty in 3 hours in a securities case. Wow. Which is like, that should take 2 days minimum just to go through the numbers first. Sure. So completely innocent. They shoved it under the rug. Raj, of course, files an appeal, as he should. Court, everybody knows everyone. They throw it out. And you have a situation where the government then didn't go after Anil Kumar for perjury because it was against their best interests. So my question is, when you are, because you've been on the other side of the desk, when you're on that side of the desk, just like we said with police, you're held to a higher standard and you're there to uphold the law. And the last thing you want to do is put an innocent man in prison or someone who was completely violated of their rights even in prison because it sets a bad precedent. Do you think that there should be some serious penalties for, beyond a reasonable doubt, prosecutors who ignore evidence or hide evidence and try things that they shouldn't and therefore take away people's freedoms and change lives?
Well, it's layered. I mean, if you're asking me, should there be consequences for criminal conduct, which is what you just described?
Yes.
A prosecutor hiding evidence, a prosecutor misrepresenting evidence in order to be a conviction. That to me is it's far more whether or not there should be layers of checks. It's criminal conduct. Yeah. So the way you're describing it to me begs an easy answer. The more difficult question really is, and I think it's the question you're asking, and it's where I kind of started with all this. There is such a danger in the use of polluted or corrupt sources, such a danger, that we instruct jurors, think about this, we instruct jurors that their testimony is to be taken with caution when their testimony is predicated on them receiving some benefit, like a plea deal or something like that.
Who instructs them? You?
The judge.
Okay.
And so if we've got to give an instruction for a witness like that, why are we calling the witness? And the retort to that is, well, the only way to cast a play in hell is to have, devils as your cast of characters. And, Mr. McMonagle chose that witness for us because he lived a life of crime with that individual. I get it, but we're talking about a court of law. And so I always go back to, if you don't have credible evidence to corroborate an informant, there's no way in this world you should either ever call that informant or base a prosecution based on informant testimony. Now, that rarely happens. You're describing a case, obviously, that maybe it did happen, but you should never, ever, ever do it. And it's so dangerous. I use the analogy time and time again. It's diseased. It's just a diseased form of testimony. If you went to, it wouldn't be Wawa because Wawa is great these days, right? But say you went to some convenience store that's not so good and you got a candy bar, right? And it's a pretty decent Mounds bar. They still have Mounds bar, where they kitty cat bars, whatever. And you opened up the wrapper and part of the candy was rotting. Would you cut it in half and eat the good part? And that's what happens in these prosecutions. They want you to, well, okay, yeah, this part was diseased. You might have lied about this, but he's telling the truth about that. Well, you kidding? People's lives are on the line. So, and most of the people that I've ever tried cases against, I think, would embrace that view. And those that don't, those that would put up a polluted source and are aware of something that's exculpatory or some place where they've lied, that's unpardonable. And it's, quite frankly, illegal.
Yeah, and it goes back to something we were talking about right at the outset with the fact that you're also incentivized in this system to win the case.
Sure you are.
Right?
Win at all costs. I get it. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly how it does happen. I think in the few occasions where it does happen, I think if you stuck true serum into the person who might have done that, the prosecutor, the lawyer who might have done that, they'd probably tell you, well, I really believed he did it, and I was just going to win at all costs. The end justifies the means, and that's the danger. The means sometimes are unconstitutional. The means are sometimes fabricated lies. And so, what have you done? Go back to St. Thomas More. Right, yeah, Man for All Seasons. Did you ever read that? It's great. You should read it if you haven't.
Never read it. No.
And if you read the screenplay, there's this scene, and everybody knows about St. Thomas More. He lost his head for his principles, and there's this scene where More is trying to warn this kind of prosecutor type fella that he can't prosecute a case because he doesn't trust the evidence, but that the person that was involved in the accusation was certainly guilty. And Moore says to the protagonist in this, Roper, he says, would you do anything? Would you do anything? Would you break all the laws to prosecute the devil himself? And Roper, the guy, says, well, for the devil, yeah, I would throw out all the laws to prosecute the devil himself. And Moore replies, well, with all the laws gone and all the laws in England lying flat, what will you do when the cold winds blow and the devil turns round on you? Yeah. And there it is. I mean, so prosecutors have that responsibility to say, hey, listen, I may have somebody here who's guilty, but I can't take this shot because I don't trust what I'm doing and I don't trust my proofs. And if I can't trust them here, then I can't ever trust him anywhere. So I'm going to give the devil a pass this time. Catch you next time.
I have to read that. That encapsulates it.
What will you do when the devil turns around on you? Where will you hide from the cold winds that will blow then? It's great stuff.
It's fantastic because what does it talk about? It talks about the slippery slope of it all. It's another example. This is why I struggle with it so much with other things too. It's like the ends justify the means argument in life is that's a dangerous one. And it depends on the context and whatever, but when we're talking about the way that society's held together at the threads on law and rights and individual rights and freedoms and not living in a tyranny and things like that, when you start violating those, that's how you get to the China level. That's how you get to the Russia level. That's how you get to these other totalitarian governments where it's a done deal. They decide, you're done. You might be whacked. You may not even make it to court. You know, how do you stop that from happening? I think I agree that there has to be, you said the word criminal, which is exactly what it is. When things get to a certain level where there's straight up lies coming out that the prosecutor is aware of, and you have to be able to go after that without disincentivizing prosecutors to be able to do their jobs, which is...
That's a slippery slope. I get it.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah,
but
immunity, the immunity laws that exist. And listen, I'm not advocating anybody be, I've ever been aware of that a prosecutor that's ever broken a law. I haven't seen it, thank God. But if it happens, then, the hell with them.
Right. I think it's actually on an even higher level, though, when it's the actual supposedly unbiased system itself. This is not the prosecutor. It's not the cog in the machine. That's what a prosecutor is a lot, as we already talked about. It's like, well, they got to get a W because the DA, the boss said we need it, and the boss's boss is the guy that's running for office, and he needs to be able... They don't give a fuck. They just want to win office, right? It's this groupthink, corporate mentality in this case, the public sector. But when it's judges, when it's the system, when it's laws being protected that aren't laws, and it's the people making them who say, no, we're above that. That's my red line. That's where I go, nope. This is, especially if it's people who are like in elected positions, or, excuse me, I meant to say unelected positions, where they're put in there by elected people and things like that, which could be judges and stuff like that. And some judges have to win office. But when you took this Meek Mill case, this is one, people see the hashtag Free Meek. They knew he was in trouble for something or whatever. But I was really glad to see you take this one, because we're talking about something that followed around a guy for like 10 years or 12 years, all because a judge was clearly, in this case, or biased to say the least, but I would argue corrupt with how she ran the case. And so what a lot of people don't know is the actual facts and how this transpired. So would you mind, from way before you ever represented him, you can talk about that too, but can you explain what had happened to him back when he was 18, 19, where he messed up, and then what they did to him?
Back in when he was a kid, he was arrested for a weapons and small amount of cocaine charges. I think he was charged with possession with intent to distribute and firearms charges. And went to trial, was convicted, and given a period of incarceration, which he served, was released. And the incarceration that he received came with a significant tail. We call it a tail. So he not only served his time, but was on probation and parole for a significant period of time. And then had what we would call technical violations, where, you could miss a curfew, you could ingest marijuana or have something in your system where you're not actually committing a crime out there, but you've had a technical violation of your probation, and it leads to more probation and more time. And he went through really, decades of being in this cycle, even to a point where he'd made it in his career, and was still running into problems with technical violations. And I always say to people, people say, well, he violated his probation. I mean, don't come crying to me. You talk about being in a prison cell for a long period of time. Try being on probation for a long period of time and walking it off without a misstep.
And he served time
and did his time. So at any rate, I'm not crying the cry for him, but he had been, like so many, just in this unbelievable cycle of probation that he was just unable to what I'll call walk off, that ultimately led to a violation on some like summary offense violations, driving his motorcycle too fast, or got into some incident with an airport with something, all of which resulted in the dismissal of criminal charges, but again, technical violations. And finally, the judge that he'd been on probation and parole for all these years sent him to state prison for over 2 years. And that's kind of where I get involved.
How did you get involved?
Well, I was a large firm that represented Meek and up in New York. Great firm, great law firm. reached out to me and said, "Listen, we have a problem in Philadelphia. We'd like you to get involved." And it was funny because when the call came in, my partner said, I don't know if you want to get involved in that case. It's going to be ugly, because everybody kind of had a sense of how it was going to end for him, given the history of his problems with the probation system. But I get involved, and it's amazing. I reached out to the prosecutor on the case, who was a really great person. I said, "Hey, listen," these are technical violations, and this guy's doing really great. His career is taking off.
He's killing it.
He's doing wonderful. We gave him itineraries and everything else. Yeah, great. Talk to probation. Spoke to his probation officer. We're not recommending a violation. We're not recommending he go to prison. We're good. He's doing great. Great. We put the presentation in front of the judge. I don't care what the prosecutor's got to say. I don't care what the probation officer's got to say. He's got to go. So there it is, unheard of. Never had anything like that happen that I'd ever seen in life. And to their credit, Meek supporters, Roc Nation in particular, Rubin in particular, moved heaven and earth, and we threw the kitchen sink at it. Appeals, attacking the sentence, attacking the original conviction, really great lawyering that was done. And I'm not talking about myself, but really talking about the team. And then, there's an old expression, it's better to be lucky than good. And we got real lucky. It turned out that one of the police officers in his original arrest had been put on a do not call list by the Philly DA's office because they were looking at old cases and allegations of misconduct by law enforcement. So,
like a cop witness type deal?
Cop witness in his case. And so we then went and asked for a new trial based on that, and got the district attorney's office to agree, to their credit. And although the judge disagreed with that as well, we were able to take that appeal to the appellate courts, and the appellate court said, "You know what? We're granting him a new trial." So they
not
granted
with
him,
her.
No, they also agreed that she should be recused. So they granted him a new trial on his original charge of whatever 15 years ago, however long it was, and we went back with the district attorney's office and worked out a resolution where he pled to a misdemeanor, no further penalty, case over.
Wow.
So, but I tell you what, none of it happens. Quite frankly, if he's Joe Smith, none of it happens, but for the fact that he was fortunate enough to have people behind him like Roc Nation and Desiree Perez and Mike Rubin and amazing people who literally, you talk about, do you ever press a button and stop working? Worked tirelessly. And made sure lawyers like me who worked on the case were at our best, and didn't take no for an answer, and really recreated a way in which you can challenge wrongs in the criminal justice system. The free Meek buses, and you couldn't look up and see a billboard. Now he had the luxury of having that kind of support, and it proved to be helpful. At the end of the day, quite frankly, I think what was most helpful was the intervention of the district attorney's office. But everybody's motivated by being on the right side of things. On that case, we managed to get on the right side of things. But I'll never forget, anybody who knows Meek Mill, he's a tough guy and a guy of his word, quite frankly. And I saw him right after they took him into custody. They put him in, because of his celebrity status, they took him upstate and they put him into a wing with just the mentally ill patients for his protection. And he was there for a few days, and when I first saw him, I didn't even recognize him when he came out of this cell. It was like a holding cell. It was like in the bowels of a prison. And he looked at me and he said, I've been in this hellhole with all these mentally ill people. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I must have gone mentally ill. And they put me in here and I don't even know it. That's how impacted he was by the early moments of incarceration. And it led for months. It took us months to go up and come back on appeal. And to his credit, he stood tall And one of the other things that needs to be said about him, the whole time he was in there, sometimes the lawyer is educated by the client, and he would say to me, Brian, when we get through this, and we're going to get through this, there's a lot of guys in here who need my help, a lot of them. And I'm not, he wasn't coming from the perception of everybody's innocent, but I need to give back. And boy, has he ever. He got involved with the Reform Alliance. He has committed time, energy, money, and everything to try and reform, a system where you could really spiral on probation and parole. So it's a great happy ending that is in large part, attributable to him, and in large part attributable to the people that supported him.
I think a big part of the story, and there's a lot of big parts, but the point about probation and the counterintuitive nature it can have because of how deep it goes and how long it goes and stuff. Like, I understand if someone who committed awful crimes is let out of prison and maybe they let him out on the shorter end of what the sentence could be, and there's like, okay, we got to watch it. I get that. And I think that's constitutional. Like, I would make that argument. But we're the most incarcerated per capita nation on earth. You said it yourself, our recidivism rate is through the fucking roof. And a part of the reason it is because these guys and women who get out of prison from, quite frankly, simple charges or things that, you can quickly say, all right, I'm not going to do that again. They're followed around by this stuff. And then if you're Meek Mill, let's call it what it is. The guy's one of the best rappers we've had in a long time. I mean, he's fantastic. Sure. And there's certain elements that go with being a star, being on the road, having to go across state lines, right? Like, these were common violations he was getting. He has to go perform. It's how he makes a living.
That's right.
So he pays off all the debt from all the legal fees he had.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think he had like $30 million in legal fees or something.
Is that right?
It was. Please check that, the audience out there. But it was high. I read some high number when I was looking at this a few days ago just to remind myself on the case. And it's like, well, that's not the point. The point of the punishment in crime is to deter and to correct, right? Goes back to the whole Department of Corrections, no correcting going on. And you don't deter and correct when you're trying to follow people forever and not give them a chance to do it. So even if there were like some small fuck-ups, literally like, as you said, like popping a wheelie in New York where someone just took a video of it because it's Meek Mill, right? Like, is that guy a danger to society? No. That's not like, when we're talking about the people on the streets doing shit, that's not the guy I'm worried about. Yeah. That's not the guy at 3 a.m. that I'm thinking twice about when I walk outside. It's like, hey, what's up, man? How are you? Yeah. What are you doing out here? Cool. All right, me too. Right? Like, that's all it is.
It's completely the right thing to not only say, but it is the right thing. Meaning, we can do both. We always think we can only do one. We can do both. We can eliminate probation and parole for folks that are not dangerous to society and say to them, go ahead. All right, go. You're back. Listen, you run into a problem, you're going to run into a problem just like anybody else. You're good. And then there's a small group, obviously, that we want to monitor. You kind of lost the right not to be monitored for a while. You committed a crime of violence. You did some things that we're worried that you might do again. And if you do these things again, as opposed to popping a wheelie or smoking a joint or whatever the hell it is, we can't come back from that. And I think we're getting there. We're starting to see a lot of changes in the Bail Reform Act, in probation and parole. I think a lot of judges completely agree with you, by the way. From a very practical standpoint, they don't want people coming in constantly for reviews and probation reviews. They want to get on with it. They've got lists in Philadelphia. I mean, the violation of probation list for offenses is enormous, and I think most judges really agree with this. At least the ones I talked to are in agreement with it. And the sooner it happens, the better it happens, because I think it's it's a win-win. It's selfish. It's sensible. There are some things that are dissensible, but we get mired down on what was, and we don't want to, get smarter and work better and work quicker. But I think Meek's case is great for that reason, because, we'd have never heard about it. It drew a light to it, let's just say, that needed to be drawn, and I think it's it's one of those few situations in the criminal justice system where it is an easier fix than dealing with mandatory minimums or other things that people are more passionate about.
This is actually a good dichotomy to draw here too. I just thought of this, but when you're talking about, you said like without Roc Nation, without Michael Rubin, who used to be the owner of the Sixers or one of them. He just sold out because he founded Fanatics and they have some conflicts of interest in business, but really amazing guy. Like
for sure.
These people, when you say you couldn't have won without them, besides just like, being all over you and whatever, frankly, no one needs to be all over you. You're going to do the job.
Guess what? I'm going to tell you this. You haven't really seen it unless you've seen it with particularly the folks that we're talking about. They were all over us, and I remember when the case was over, telling people, working on that case made me a better lawyer, because when you operate at the level that those people operate, failure is not an option. Losing is not an option. And if you lose, well, then you got to go back in court the next day and win. They operate at a level, particularly in terms of an energy level and a level, even in terms of understanding the law, that I've never ever seen in situations where I've represented somebody and had people want to intervene in the case that aren't lawyers. You know what I mean? Like somebody's president of a company, he wants to have his input. Those folks in that case were creative in terms of strategy, legal strategy.
Legal. So you are talking all about this.
I'm telling you all of it, and it's stunned me, the versatility of the folks that were involved in that case. Desiree and Mike, and it obviously came from in Mike's situation really a labor of love. Mike,
that guy's amazing.
And in Desiree's position, both from a labor of love and from a business perspective. And I'll tell you what. You don't want to be on the wrong side when they're right, because it was amazing to see what they did on Meek's behalf, and thank goodness.
Well, Michael Rubin's a guy who walks the talk through and through as well. Self-made guy, and as far as like giving back on this cause, I'm going to forget the names, but he has like multiple organizations that he's heavily involved with that are working on issues like this, like criminal justice reform, having a good balance to things. You can't just let everyone out on the street. But it's great to hear that literally at his lowest moment, Meek himself was the guy in there saying, there's some people here who definitely, they don't have a voice.
It was remarkable. And case after case, he's seen to it that some of the guys there were a couple of guys that were up there that really were being looked at by the Innocence Project, and he you know what? He didn't just say it, he did it.
That's awesome.
Not a lot of people do that, so I've got enormous respect for him.
Have you been involved in some of that stuff since then with him at all?
Very, very rarely, other than, contributing, because the alliance itself is fantastic. They're lobbyists and doing stuff at the highest level. What they're really trying to do is change legislation and change laws. And they've got a great group, and Mike Rubin got some of the most powerful people in the country involved. He goes and gets Kraft and other colleagues who respect him, who are willing to put their money where their mouth is. And it was an amazing, probably one of the nicest experiences, and coming from hell to like heaven. I was there when Mike went and picked him up at the prison in his helicopter and brought him in to ring the Liberty Bell.
Oh, yeah, for the Sixers playoff.
And I kept thinking, I remember seeing him up at that prison, thinking that he'd gone insane. And the way he put it, like, oh my God, did I go insane and not know it? And there he was. So goes to show you, what effort can do, and effort on the part of good people.
You, in this case, I don't know if I got to this point because we're talking about some of the people involved in like the things they were doing on the legal side, as you pointed out. So that's impressive. Like that is what you were referring to mostly.
Sure.
Like I didn't expect that. But on the other side of it, where you talk about like, if this were John Smith, it wouldn't have been able to get to that level because he wouldn't have had this help. You wouldn't have had free Meek signs everywhere and everything.
How could you?
Which, by the way, is fine because now he can be, as you say, he can be an advocate for this. He can use that platform to be able to do something great. So it's a great thing all around. But this is a case where you're actually working on the other end, as opposed to like Cosby. In Cosby, you're working against public opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we work public. I've said this so many times. The two greatest examples of, in Cosby, there was an impossibility in trying to change public opinion. There'd been too much damage done, and too many, allegations made to come back from that. And that's my mentality going into Meek. I go into Meek thinking, well, what do you mean public opinion? What do you mean? And I as I was saying before with Roc Nation, and they're like, what do you mean? What do we mean? We will get public opinion on our side. And they went and did it, and did it in remarkable fashion. I mean, at the end of the day, again, I say we did have to get a little bit lucky, but there wasn't, even amongst, you'll hear, as a rapper and he deserved what he got, you had some of that. But at the end of the day, by the time everybody got there, like, it was a probation violation.
Yeah, this is crazy.
I mean, what are we doing? And
he was 18 when it happened.
And it taught me that you can, if you've got the resources and a little bit of right on your side too. Let's not forget. I mean, we had great talking points. We had somewhat of a victimization there. Cosby, it was pretty impossible. But with Cosby, I also learned, you talk about getting in front of the cameras and stuff like that. I've been, as I try to instruct folks, you always have the ability to be creative when you get the chance, and
clearly,
yeah. And with Cosby, there was a time or two where I thought we did some good things, but I really never appreciated the breadth of the Me Too movement until we tried to do that in Cosby, because then they came after us.
How so?
Articles. There was one article written about me about how I victim shamed during cross-examination at a preliminary hearing. Like, I'm victim shaming because I'm cross-examining the complainant. Well, actually, a detective. They didn't even call the complainant about the inconsistencies in the versions that had been given by the complainant. And the fact that the complainant in the case had gone on her own to visit him at his home after the so-called sexual assault. That's victim shaming now. And so, lawyers now have to really be careful in the public setting when they're defending their clients, because sometimes no matter what you do, you can't win.
Right.
So why bother trying to win? Try the case in the courtroom, litigate your motions. Keep a lot of times I'll say, the press will call me for a comment. I'll say, well, I said everything I had to say in court.
Now, that was a preliminary hearing, you said? That cross-examination with the witness? Yeah,
with the detective who took the statement from the witness. Article, lawyer shames, lawyer, it was almost like, I think one of the quotes was, I was raping the complainant a second time, even though she wasn't even there. But I mean, that's how personal it gets now with today and the media and the internet and everything else. You can be gone in a minute. They can come get you.
Did that carry weight in your decision? Hold on.
Yeah.
In your decision to then at trial have Andrea, your female counterpart, do the cross-examination of, I think she was also named Andrea, right?
Yeah.
The
Angela,
alleged victim.
Angela Grusa,
right.
and Andrea Constant was the complainant. Yeah.
So you, who, again, one of the greatest cross-examiners in the history of history, did not cross-examine the key witness because you're a male.
Yeah, that wasn't my choice.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll leave that one there. I know.
You can leave it lie.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that says a lot.
Yeah.
That changes things.
That wasn't strategic on my part. It might have been strategic. I think it was strategic, quite frankly, in the end of it, which was to have a woman cross-examined. But and there's always truth to that strategy, I think. I've always been a big believer in the fact that you cross-examine to cross-examine.
Right.
And so,
objective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like when I see subjectivity of the Twitter mob, reaching the courtroom, that's where I get, and it's there. Like, that's where I get so worried. Man.
Everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in all walks of life. It's in everything. You really, if you care enough, or if you're in a position where for me, I don't care, quite frankly. I mean, I care about, how it certainly affects my firm or my family, but I really don't care what somebody says about me on social media. I do care about how it might resonate with my client, because now I've adversely affected them by something I've said that's caught fire. And that's why you just have to be so careful as you're handling cases, to just tuck it in and just leave it be, because they'll parse every word. They'll try and put you on trial, and then by definition affect your client. And so sometimes less said is best.
Right, and that goes to what you were saying about the change in your approach to media and things like that. I agree. Yeah. Like, when Ben Brafman's out there standing next to somebody going, "My client did not do this. He is absolutely innocent. It is a ridiculous case. This prosecutor is corrupt. We absolutely hate to see the city fall apart." He's standing next to fucking Martin Shkreli. It's like, all right, bro. Like, there's no way those people on the jury haven't seen that, and there's no way they're not going to be like, "Oh, this fucking guy." Whereas when you're
it's a great imitation, and Ben's a great lawyer, and it's a great imitation.
But like, you understand what I'm saying? I understand he's doing what he's got to do, and I don't know the guy, but like, I know how it looks.
Yeah.
And they can't say that about you when you're in there arguing for Cosby.
That's exactly right. Just keep it in the courtroom. Say it. Say what you got to say in the courtroom, and go home.
Yeah. But you had said something in the Meek thing. I just didn't want to get you off the Cosby example there.
Sure.
Where you were talking about, like, following people around with this whole probation thing we were talking about, like it following you around forever and being counterintuitive. The thing that really bothered me about him is, yes, on the one hand, okay, if he were Joe Blow, this wouldn't have been able to happen. He's a powerful guy with powerful friends and whatever. But on the other hand, this was a kid from nothing.
Oh, yeah.
Who made something of himself. And okay, he made a couple mistakes when he was young, but he didn't rape anyone. He didn't murder it. There was nothing like that, right? It was minor stuff. And then he gets out of prison, and he's a star, and he's trying to do it the right way. And he talks about trying to do it the right way. He's trying to be an example to people like, "Hey, all right, I had to do music. Why don't you be a lawyer? You can make it out too." And yet the system, in order to make a story, because, and you had the same thing with Allen Iverson too, what they tried to do to him. Yeah. In order to make a story, like, they're like, "Well, let's go after him because that'll be the headlines." And you have to say, well, aren't we being counterintuitive, because we're supposed to help this person be an example to all the others who are surrounded in a no-win situation growing up?
So true. And even in his hearing, the irony of it, like, we brought in, and we're like, "Judge, listen, look at the work. Look at the people that he's employing. Yeah. Look at the good. Like, isn't this what we hope for out of probationers?"
Yes.
I mean, this is the gold standard. But it goes back to something I've always said. I brought up the fact that it probably doesn't happen with the great people that he had behind him, but quite often celebrities, whether they be athletes or rappers or actors or comedians, whatever they might be, having celebrity status can also be a huge detriment. And in Meek's case, it really was, at least in terms of how he was dealt with by the system initially.
On the way there, yes.
On the way there.
Yes.
There's always jealousy. There's always, there's also the fact that, with high publicity cases, they're really tough, because judges don't want to read about themselves in the newspaper, and everybody's watching, and everybody's different. The prosecutors are different. The judges are different. Everybody acts differently in a high-profile case. So do the criminal defense lawyers, by the way. I mean, all of us react to the bright lights, and rarely do any of the players react well to the bright lights. They're always doing something different because of perception, because of this or that. Now, sometimes it could be a good thing because everybody's at their best, but, people tend to flock to the light, I've noticed. And, sometimes the celebrity cases are the ones you don't wish for, because you're going to get a lot of light,
Yeah, it's important to say it does cut both ways.
Yeah.
There's people who abuse power, and they're right to have it and use it. And then there's the people who are quite literally targeted unfairly because of it. And I've seen both ends. It's another thing where it's like, well, I don't have a good answer for it because you're always going to have
No,
self-motivated humans around. You know what I mean?
You're crying. There's no fix to it. You know, no one's whining for them. They have the money, they have the resources, etc. But from a lawyer's perspective, you know, and I'll sometimes have to speak to a lot of young lawyers. It is an interesting dynamic that is just worth saying.
Yeah, you had another thing. I almost forgot about this. I meant to ask it earlier when you were talking about something, but you did mention it separately a few minutes ago. The whole Innocence Project thing and what they do. I think that's so cool because one thing that they don't get credit for is their burden of proof to take a case is high.
Yeah.
Like they do.
Yeah.
They sometimes they take the time and they do years of homework to be like,
Sure
is
they
this
do.
person, you can never be 100%, but is this person innocent, right?
They're painstaking. Yeah.
But they take on the cause of society's lowest, someone locked in a box, usually for like the rest of their life, for something they didn't do.
The Innocence Project is amazing, but some of them are great lawyers that could simply just take high profile cases and make a lot of money, and they're there and they're putting their time in and they're working hard, and it's all pro bono and it's all for the good of the cause, and it's an amazing organization. And you're right, they don't take every case. They look really hard at it. They don't want to make mistakes and promote people as innocent who aren't. And in the same breath, they don't want to miss one. And it's an amazing organization. And there's a lot of people involved in it, and a lot of people who aren't like the faces of it that work behind it. And God's work.
Yeah, I appreciate what they do, and I should talk about it more too, because it's the kind of thing that I think needs attention. But listen, this was great. I appreciate you so much coming in.
It's a pleasure being here. I'm glad I got the chance to sit in this seat. I'm a fan, and I appreciate you making me part of your show.
Well, thank you, and I hope I can have you back at some point, because I could have you in here all day. Like, there's a million things I could ask you about, but I really, and I think I will speak for most sane people, and the sane people aren't always in the content in the comment sections, but I think I will speak for most people when I say I really, really appreciate your candor today.
Excellent.
I didn't know. I've only ever talked to you off camera, off the record, and you do have a job to do where you have to, you can't say things publicly, but to give us the viewpoint in how that mentality shift is a real question mark. It's a moral dilemma with going from one side to the other, the light side to the dark side, but also then having to uphold the law and how you look at that and how it's a very imperfect process. I really, really appreciate that. And I know there are a lot of great defense attorneys out there. It's not fair to say there's a lot of scumbags. There's a lot of great ones. But I do wish all attorneys had that presence of mind.
Well, it's nice of you to say. Thank you.
All right. Well, everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to it. Peace.